Chapter 1081 Dysplasia. After he left Jiang Chen's office, Kelvin repeated what the boss told him in his head. 5 days later, the Outer Space Security Summit was going to take place. At the meeting, celestial trade would publicize the evidence of the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations and demonstrate its aggressive intentions. In fact, the latter didn't need to be proved. Two civilizations with completely different values never have the options to exist in harmony from the start. Since both sides were bugs in each other's eyes, only one option existed to prove who stood at the top of the food chain. War. Kelvin looked down at the documents in his hands again, recalling the task his boss gave him a minute ago. It was the first time in his life he felt the burden of the task on his shoulders. After a long working session into the evening, Jiang Chen did not go home immediately. Instead, he took a boat and went to Coconut Island alone. The island was completely transformed into a transit point between the modern world and the apocalypse. Every month, a ship sailed to the island, unloaded food, daily necessities, and other materials, and occasionally transported tightly sealed containers. Some of these containers contained advanced industrial machine tools, some were T3 power armors produced in the 6th Street, and some were other high-tech products. Although no soldiers were stationed on the island, a drone attack formation guarded the island. Foreign agents certainly thought about investigating that mysterious island, but not one succeeded. On the small island, Jiang Chen stopped the boat at the dock. After the drone confirmed his identity, he went to the warehouse in the center of the island. In the corner of the warehouse sat a lonely machine Jiang Chen named Hamster Killer No. 1. The last time Lin Lin used this machine to transfer a hamster from the modern world to the apocalypse, and then back. They finally made the breakthrough in interdimensional travel from 0.1 to 1. Although there were still some ways to go before making interdimensional travel for humans a reality, it was definitely a good start. However, Jiang Chen did not expect this device to come in handy so quickly. Jiang Chen sat beside the machine, took out a few test tubes filled with dark green liquid from his pocket, placed them in the center of the two discs, and then connected the lines to turn on the power. Looking at the electricity arcs jumping, he pressed the switch with a numbing sensation in his skull. It took a while and some effort before he sent the test tubes to the apocalypse. Jiang Chen then closed the machine and traveled to the apocalypse. One of the test tubes contained the material extracted from the nest, and the other tubes contained spores and larva extracts. The cells in the test tubes were not killed. It was still possible to see the peristaltic movements of the unknown substance through the dark green culture solution. After she received these tubes from Jiang Chen, Lin Lin immediately locked herself in the lab. Jiang Chen did not have to wait for long before the lab door opened again. Lin Lin waved her hand and called Jiang Chen in. Next to a special microscope, Jiang Chen saw the tubes he brought with him on the test tube rack and two familiar-looking tubes. From the labels attached to them, he recalled where the two tubes came from. The samples you brought are obviously not the same as ones from Fallout Shelter 005 and the ones from the city center. But there is a lot of similarities in the DNA code. The nest you encountered is an upgraded version. But due to dysplasia, many functions were inhibited. After listening to Lin Lin, Jiang Chen's eyebrows suddenly twitched. Dysplasia? Hundreds of tungsten bombs and an entire power armor brigade finally took care of this mess, and you are telling the ones I encountered has dysplasia? What do I do when there is a fully functioning one? Lin Lin nodded. Yes, if you provide enough organic matter to it and give it plenty of time for photosynthesis, digesting and absorbing those organic matters into its own components, the nest will gradually develop into a complete form. Based on a simulation of its DNA code, it will become a terrifying existence that can't be eliminated. Lin Lin then paused and said with a stern expression. At least with the existing means, I can't think of a way to kill it. Every spore cell has the ability to grow into a nest, and the number of splits is no longer limited. Unless we can kill every spore, then a nest may pop out from somewhere, someday. The evolutionary speed of the nest sent chills down his spine. For they who completely abandoned it, Earth would be a completely strange planet. Whether the gravity or air composition or magnetic field environment, even if they understood it, it wouldn't mean they could 100% adapt to it. In a war, humans first occupied the home advantage. However, on this strange soil, each time they interacted with humans, their abilities would evolve at an incredible speed. If the nest infiltrated Earth a few more times, it would be hard to say how harmony will fulfill their aggressions. After Jiang Chen realized the severity of the problem, he debated for a moment and immediately ordered. Organize the information about the nest. Focus your analysis on the similarity of the X2 bacteria and the T-series viruses in genotype. In addition, give me a separate paper file and an electronic file. It would be great if the electronic file can include images that are easy to understand. Hey, I am not your assistant. This will be very tiring. Lin pouted and protested. 10 boxes of mango pudding. Lin debated for a while, as if she was making a big concession, before saying, 15 boxes of strawberry pudding. Jiang Chen shook his head. Is this difficult for me? I will bring them to you next time. But wait, I thought you liked mango. Lin stuck out her tongue and looked away. I still have too much mango pudding. I haven't finished the ones you brought me the last time. The amount of work to sort out the data of the nest was not small, but it was not difficult for a digitalized human. After getting her promise of the pudding, Lin promised Jiang Chen to complete the report in 3 days. From the research institute, Jiang Chen returned to the mansion through the back door. Before coming to the apocalypse, he had already told Aisha that he would stay in the apocalypse for the next 3 days until Lin completes the report. This information would play a valuable role in the Outer Space Security Summit. The attention of the global community completely depended on this information. An informal Federal Reserve shareholders meeting was being held in the Morgan Stanley building on Wall Street. The man who sat by the door was Daniel Morgan, the head of the Morgan family. Also sitting at the conference table with him was a member of the Rockefeller family, representing the Loki family of the B-City Consortium. Those who were qualified to sit around the conference table possessed influence no less than Franklin on the bill, and they could breathe. Any decision around the table could cause an earthquake in the financial market. To put things exaggeratedly, at least 1/3 of the world's capital was housed in this conference room. First, let's toast to our victory. Daniel Morgan picked up the champagne and looked around. Victory belongs to the WASP and Wall Street belongs to the WASP. Old Rockefeller smiled and also raised his glass. Without an extraordinarily long introduction, 12 wine glasses were held high and celebrated the victory for the WASP consortium, led by Daniel. 12 waiters stepped forward and handed each member a towel respectfully. They then took the towels and wine glasses away and proceeded to leave the room. Daniel tossed the towel into the waiter's tray, then proudly looked at the members around the conference room. Among the influential individuals around the world, he was the youngest at 40 years old and undoubtedly the most successful. After all the waiters left, Daniel clapped his hands and gestured everyone to look at him. Just yesterday, Morgan completed the acquisition of Citibank shares under Rothschild Bank. So far, I'm honored to announce to you that we've completely kicked those Jews out. Courteous applause resounded, and even old Rockefeller clapped gently, but his murky eyes showed an intriguing brilliance. Daniel nodded slightly and humbly accepted the members' praise to him and his name. When it came to the control of the Rothschild family, the word Fed must be mentioned. As everyone knew, the Federal Reserve was equivalent to the central bank and possessed the power to regulate the macro world banknote. An interest rate hike could mean that some factories in a weak economy just worked for free for a month, and a country's debt just became unpayable. Interest rates were equivalent to nuclear weapons in the financial sector. The most terrifying thing was that this nuclear weapon was controlled by private hands. Although the members of the Federal Reserve Board were nominated by the President and appointed by the Senate, they strictly acted in the political sense. However, according to the Owen Glass Act, the Federal Reserve were divided into 12 reserve areas, each of which established an independent regional reserve bank. The equity of each regional Federal Reserve was subscribed to by the member banks of each region according to the proportion of their assets. Take the New York Reserve as an example. According to the latest public data, the major shareholders were Citigroup with 15%, Chase Manhattan with 14%, Morgan Trust with 9%, Hanwha with 8%, Hanover with 7%, and these banks were often controlled by the financial families such as Rockefeller, Morgan, and Rothschild. Goldman Sachs fell last year, and the Rothschild family was just kicked out. The shares of banks such as Citigroup and Hanover were divided by Rockefeller and Morgan. If Wall Street in 2018 was controlled by the Jewish and Anglo-Saxons and the button for nuclear weapons was in the hands of two people, then Wall Street in 2019 was dominated by the WASP consortium. Old Rockefeller coughed, pulling Daniel out of the intoxication of victory. Celebrating victory can be left to the evening banquet. Gents, now we have more important things to discuss. That's certainly true. Daniel smiled, no dissatisfaction apparent on his face. Old Rockefeller raised his hand over his shoulder and moved his finger. The secretary standing behind him understood the gesture and put a document on the conference table respectfully. Tilting his back forward slightly, the old Rockefeller put on his gold-gilded glasses and opened the file. Yesterday, on June 11th, the Central Power Company, the Yodo Power Company, and Celestial Trade reached an agreement to increase power imports. According to the electricity consumption data of Nippon last year, Celestial Trade successfully monopolized 20% of electricity in the country. Everyone in the room exchanged glances in shock, even Daniel showed a hint of surprise. This news hasn't yet entered the disclosure process. You might not have received the news yet. My information came from a cabinet official. Old Rockefeller glanced at the audience. I don't need to say more, you might have already felt it. We're losing control of the situation in Asia. When the statement came out, the room was stunned. All of them were representatives of major consortia and were financial giants on Wall Street. With their IQ and senses, they obviously noticed this point. However, prior to this, everyone was focused on Europe. Everyone was trying to snag a piece of meat from Rothschild, so no one focused on the opposite side of the earth. The dominance of the dollar is being shaken, and it might have been a wrong choice for the Freemasonry to fall so quickly. What can we do then? Are we going to drag them out of the grave? Maybe we can help the Krupp Consortium. As long as there are new rivals to contain Future Group, that's even more unrealistic. Daniel interrupted everyone's arguments and shook his head. He tapped his chin with his fingers. He was still immersed in the joy of victory, but he already noticed the looming crisis facing the WASP consortium. We must curtail the influence of Celestial Trade from expanding. The bad signs have emerged, and if we allow their global grid plan to progress, we will be at more and more of a disadvantage. That's right. Rockefeller nodded and looked around the table. I know everyone here is cooperating with Future Group in many fields, but if they shake the foundation of the dollar, I think everyone knows what that would mean. The financial empire of Wall Street was built on the dollar. Through the two levers of the exchange rate and market, Wall Street giants had plundered the world for nearly a century. Once the dollar lost the aura as the world currency, central banks would decrease the dollar reserve, and every dollar bill issued by the Fed would become useless. The Wall Street financial empire built by bills would become worthless overnight. 2 hours since the start of the meeting, everyone including Daniel was completely sober from the joy of victory. The Jewish consortium had fallen, but the jackals who killed them weren't satiated yet. They had already aimed across the Pacific. When the interests of all people present were threatened, it was clear the WASP consortium had never been as united as it was now. In the past 2 hours, they developed a plan to block the global grid plan. After the meeting, representatives of the major consortiums got up and left in a hurry. Daniel Morgan, who was the moderator of the meeting, didn't get up. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. At that moment, he suddenly remembered his conversation with Carmen a month ago. At that time, the former Rothschild financial tyrant lowered his stance and asked him for help, but he refused Carmen with almost no hesitation. Just the opposite, I'm extremely convinced that one day in the future, I will be grateful for the choices made today. Fingers gently tapping on the table, Daniel muttered to himself the lines he once said, but his tone now carried a hint of hesitation and no longer carried the same certainty. The negotiations between our South America delegation team and the Ecuadorian side have ended, and we made great progress. The President of Ecuador has agreed to connect their power grid with us and even welcomes us to register a power company locally to export electricity directly to them, as well as helping them invest in the construction of the national grid. Their only requirement is that we must bear the cost of construction and maintenance of the submarine cable. Through the interdimensional communication device, Xia Xiyu reported the progress of yesterday's work to Jiang Chen. South American countries were generally poor. Ecuador's finance couldn't support a submarine cable that spanned the ocean. It was basically impossible to recover their investment through the domestic electricity market. Therefore, the country simply outsourced the entire project to celestial trade. Jiang Chen also didn't intend to recover his investment from Ecuador. His real goal was Brazil, which was behind Ecuador. As the largest economy in South America with the 8th largest electricity consumption in the world, Jiang Chen's ultimate goal was to export cheap electricity to Brazil and push his global grid plan to South America. Ecuador's conditions matched Jiang Chen's expectations. As for the convenience of investing in the construction of the local power grid, it wasn't a problem of celestial trade. However, the Ecuadorian government certainly weren't guarded against celestial trade, as the government allowed a foreign company to operate their state grid. Jiang Chen smiled and nodded at Xia Xiyu on the holographic screen. Thank you. If you really want to thank me, come back sooner. Her index finger twirled a strand of hair beside her ear, and she rolled her eyes. Her seductiveness always tickled his heart. Generally speaking, work reports like this were typically done at night. However, because Jiang Chen had to stay in the apocalypse for a few days, Aisha loaned her EP to her and he conducted interdimensional communication with the chip designed by Lin Lin. It was time to get off work and Xia Xiyu finished the work at hand. After they discussed the important matters, they began to chat. When she heard Jiang Chen talking about the apocalypse, Xia Xiyu made a request. Can you show me what's outside the window? I've always been very curious about the apocalypse you talked about. What kind of world is it? Ah, of course, if it's not convenient, then that's okay. Xia Xiyu suddenly somewhat regretted her request. She was certainly curious. Since Jiang Chen confessed to her the secrets of this world, she had always been very curious. What kind of war, in just 3 years, had turned the jewels of the human civilization for 22nd centuries into ruins? However, she was hesitant because she wasn't certain if Jiang Chen could present everything in this world that only belonged to him. Although she wouldn't be disappointed by a rejection, she was very worried that Jiang Chen would overcomplicate the issue. Women in love often overcomplicated things. Jiang Chen didn't think too much about it at all, let alone the fact that there was nothing to hide. There's nothing inconvenient about that, but there isn't much to be seen here. Jiang Chen pointed the camera on the watch outside the window. The weather is nice today. You can see the blue sky and white clouds. Outside the wall of this mansion is Fishbone Base. Now that all the mutants and zombies in Wanghai have been cleared out, you can only see mutants in Jia City. If you're interested, I'll bring you some video footage back if I get an opportunity. Fishbone Base. That's a real strange name. Xia Xiyu snorted and giggled, covering her mouth. Jiang Chen also laughed. It's from a canned food brand. It gives me feelings of nostalgia. The experience of using sandpaper to grind the outer packaging was certainly nostalgic. Just as Jiang Chen looked out the window and remembered the hard times, softness embraced the back of his head. Two arms hugged him from behind. "What are you doing?" Sun Jiao's voice rang beside his ears and she looked at the holographic screen with interest. Jiang Chen was just about to say that he was on the phone. But then he felt a murderous gaze which locked on him across the dimension. He involuntarily shuddered and suddenly realized that it wasn't Aisha who was on the phone with him. "Hello," Sun Jiao said hello with a smirk. Her eyes scanned across Xia Shiyu's chest, and her smirk became even more obvious. This move naturally didn't escape Xia Shiyu's eyes. When she looked at Sun Jiao's 36D then thought of her body only bigger than Aisha, her self-esteem was critically damaged. Even if Jiang Chen had confessed to her that he had a family, in this world and not smaller than in the modern world, she still felt jealous and her vinegar jar, tipped when she saw another woman embracing him. "She is Sun Jiao, the woman I mentioned before." Jiang Chen introduced her to Xia Shiyu, feeling numb, but he couldn't think of things to say. Looking at the awkward expression on Jiang Chen's face, Sun Jiao suddenly understood. With the same smirk, she moved her face closer to him and embraced him. "Dear, why are you so nervous?" The cold and elegant beauty was getting colder and colder. "I'll ask you when you come back." "Humph." Xia Shiyu hung up the phone. Jiang Chen shook his head and turned off the holographic screen. He looked at Sun Jiao, who sat down on the sofa making an innocent expression, and sighed. "You've created a big problem for me. You have to kneel on the washboard, too." Sun Jiao mocked. "Not that bad. Where did you learn this?" "There's no such thing as a washboard here." "From some novels, don't worry about these details." Sun Jiao leaned back on the sofa and crossed her legs leisurely. "Let's put the non-substantial things aside and focus on business. I've done everything you asked me to do. The Aerospace Science and Technology Research Institute has already established the T3 Power Armor Gravity-Free Environment Automation Production Project. Based on the space station specifications you provided, the production link is expected to be divided into 5 modules, completed by 5 different space stations with different functions. How long will it take to produce results?" Jiang Chen asked immediately. Sun Jiao smiled. "It won't be long, the technology is available. There are a few experts in Camp 027 who worked on outer space production modules before the war. Jiang Lin said the prototype will be available at the end of the month at the latest." 1. Vinegar jar, describing women who easily feel jealous. 2. Kneel on the washboard. A washboard is a tool to wash clothes before the invention of the washing machine. A washboard has a rough surface. Therefore, when the husband makes a mistake, the wife may force the husband to kneel on the washboard as a punishment. Chapter 1084 10 Countries Diplomatic Visit of Xian. As the outer space development market gradually heated up, the industrial capacity of Celestial City also increased to an astounding level. Especially in the heavy industry sector, as asteroid mining provided the heavy industry sector with raw materials. Wireless power transmission almost reduced the cost of electricity to the minimum. Other than the high cost of the space station itself, there would be no other place on Earth more suitable for the development of the heavy industry sector. In less than a year, Celestial's production capacity already caught onto the new Malaysia Special District in the Ange Island Industrial Park. It was expected to surpass the combined production capacity of the 2 industrial parks in the next 6 months. Just half a month ago, Future Mining successfully achieved smelting and production of multiple types of steel in the space environment, such as grade A, B, and C. At the same time, Future Heavy Industries also completed the integration of the technology provided by Jiang Chen and made breakthroughs in the 2 technical difficulties of molybdenum neural connection device and power armor core chip, taking it from theory to production. It was now possible to build a production line of T3 power armor in Celestial City. Backed by the resources of the modern world, the production and assembly technology of the apocalypse, the factors that restricted the production of power armors would no longer exist. When power armors stepped down from the assembly line, Jiang Chen could already see terrified and shocked faces. After Jiang Chen returned to the modern world, he planned to start a large-scale expansion plan. The proposed expansion would turn the Power Armor Brigade into 2 Power Armor Divisions and 2 Mechanized Infantry Divisions. The focus of research and development of power armor would also be shifted from land to outer space, to Gauss rifles which were more suitable for low-gravity environments, and to replace the existing aerodynamic engine with an ion propulsion engine. Days passed one by one, and soon, it was June 13th. With the Outer Space Security Summit held by Celestial Trade approaching its start date, the top 10 foreign ministers of the UA, Russia, Britain, France, Frankfurt, Nippon, Arabia all arrived in Koro City. The president of XIN and the foreign minister held a grand welcoming ceremony at the airport. Celestial Trade and the XIN government invested a lot of effort to make this meeting between the 10 countries happen. The drones and the police were dispatched together, and the patrol frequency doubled to strengthen the security of Koro City, which was already extremely safe. Celestial Trade even mobilized a special combat brigade from the New Moon Island military base and temporarily deployed it in downtown Koro to ensure the safety of representatives. The venue of the conference was set in the new Parliament building in Koro, and the hotel where the representatives were staying was the Hilton next to the Parliament building. The wealthy Celestial Trade directly booked out the entire building for a week. Foreign ministers and senior officials lived on the top floors, and soldiers with kinetic skeletons filled the rest of the hotel. Everything was meant to show one thing: the importance Celestial Trade placed on this summit. Whether it was the emphasis on the topic to be discussed or the countries participating in the summit. A week before the summit, there was gossip and rumors about the topic of the summit. Some people claimed on social networking sites that the Outer Space Security Summit was likely related to the recent X2 bacteria in Finland. There were even people with more wild imaginations who linked the X2 bacteria with aliens, Area 51, the moon landing conspiracy theory, and Celestial Trade's Mars colonization project together to describe X2 bacteria as Martians' plan to fight back. Driven by public opinion, this summit naturally attracted media attention. However, the major media were resentful to discover that the content of the summit discussion wouldn't be made public. Whether the content would be made available was also a topic surrounding the summit. Everyone wanted to get first-hand information about the summit. Everyone wanted to be in the storm eye of the controversy and win the envy of their global peers. However, the voices from governments was rarely consistent, and the media couldn't obtain any information. What kind of issue made Celestial Trade so cautious? Not only the reporters outside the Hilton, but all those who were interested in this meeting all shared the same speculations. 2 days before the summit, Jiang Chen took Lin Lin's report on X2 bacteria and finally returned to the modern world. Originally, he planned to return yesterday, but a small delay in Lin Lin's research forced him to delay his return by 1 day. Returning to Koro Island by boat, Jiang Chen didn't go home but went to the presidential palace. When he arrived at the presidential palace, Zhang Yaping was enjoying the presence of the Frankfurt foreign minister as the two joked and laughed. Jiang Chen didn't disturb the pair. Instead, he followed President Zhang's secretary and sat down in the lounge. He slowly sipped on his coffee while he waited for the end of the informal diplomatic conference between the two countries. He didn't have to wait for long. Soon, he heard footsteps. "You finally stepped outside." Zhang Yaping sat down on the sofa opposite Jiang Chen. With a weary expression, he asked his secretary, "Pour me a cup of water." "No tea, just hot water." The senior foreign ministers of 10 countries visited and Zhang Yaping didn't have time for a break this week. What made it worse was that the Outer Space Security Summit would start soon, but Jiang Chen suddenly started to play hide and seek with him. Although it wasn't the first time he disappeared, it was the first time before such a major event. There have been some recent developments. Jiang Chen smiled and ambiguously skipped the question. You did a great job. That depends on how you interpret the word great. Zhang Yaping shook his head helplessly. He took the water from the secretary, whispered a thank you, then signaled her to leave. He then looked to Jiang Chen. Every country's foreign minister is asking me one thing. Guess what is it? Extraterrestrial civilization. Jiang Chen smiled. Yes. Zhang Yaping sipped the water and soothed his throat. In a half-joking tone, he said, everyone wants to know what tricks you're playing, whether extraterrestrial civilization is indeed a thing or whether it's just a smoke bomb. Of course, the foreign ministers are most concerned about the steps you've taken in the study of extraterrestrial civilizations. Kerry also threatened me with a warning, saying that anything about unilaterally liaising with extraterrestrial civilizations without the consent of the United Nations would be regarded as a provocation of war by the UA. What a joke. Zhang Yaping shook his head and put the cup aside. Aliens? He's seen too many Hollywood blockbusters. Although Zhang Yaping had already seen the agenda of the Outer Space Security Summit, he didn't take extraterrestrial civilizations seriously. It was to be expected since Jiang Chen never disclosed the details of celestial trade space activities to him. Looking at Zhang Yaping, Jiang Chen had a strange expression. Zhang Yaping noticed Jiang Chen's strange look. He stopped and asked, "What's wrong? Was it something I said?" "Nothing, it's my bad." Jiang Chen paused for a moment and looked at the confused Zhang Yaping. "What if I told you that the extraterrestrial civilization we mentioned in the invitation is not a joke?" At 6 o'clock in the evening, a black car was parked downstairs at the Hilton. The reporters who sensed blood all focused on the vehicle that rolled in. After they confirmed the license plate number, they immediately surrounded the vehicle. The security guards waiting at the entrance of the hotel were prepared, and they formed a wall to block the reporters as well as passers-by and tourists curious about the commotion. Frankfurt Foreign Minister Stein, who had just finished his visit from Xi'an's presidential palace, got out of the car and walked to the main entrance of the hotel. The reporters desperately tried to stuff microphones below the guards' armpits and above the guards' shoulders, in an attempt to reach Stein to obtain some more information about the upcoming Outer Space Security Summit in 2 days. "Mr. Stein, did you just go to Xi'an's presidential palace? Will Frankfurt and Xi'an strengthen their cooperation in space? Are informal diplomatic talks with Xi'an at this point related to the upcoming Outer Space Security Summit? Are the rumors about extraterrestrial civilization true? People have the right to know the truth." Stein was growing impatient. He raised his hand and gestured to the reporters in front of him to form a path. "Before the summit, we aren't very familiar with the specific details of the discussion. The Frankfurt government will disclose the details of the Outer Space Security Summit at the first available point in time if the outcome of the discussion can be disclosed." After a short explanation, Stein whispered a few words to his assistant. The assistant nodded and the 6 bodyguards surrounding Stein formed a human shield in front of him. Under complaints from reporters, the security guards of the hotel formed a path in the crowd and escorted the foreign minister inside. Arriving by elevator to the floor where the Frankfurt delegation was staying, Stein went straight to his presidential suite. "If there are no big issues, don't come in and bother me. I will eat dinner at about 7 o'clock. Request a hotel's waiter to send it up." At the door, he stopped and instructed his assistant behind him. "Yes." The assistant nodded. Stein closed the door and hung his suit on the hanger. He went to the sofa in the living room and sat down. He took out a satellite phone from his pocket. After pressing a few numbers, he called the Frankfurt presidential palace. "How's the meeting with the Xi'an president?" Stein sighed when he heard Evelyn's question. "I didn't get any useful information. I could feel they're also confused. I even have a feeling that President Zhang has learned less than we learned. He's a puppet after all." Evelyn smiled. "Yes." Stein leaned on the sofa. Celestial trade completely excluded him from the Corps. Rather than acting as a president, He is more like a butler who takes care of the man's backyard. I tried to contact Celestial Trade Space Department CEO, Kelvin, but he has no intention of holding informal talks with us before the summit. 1 inch and then he pushed you onto Zhang Yaping. Evelyn smiled. That's right. Stein nodded. What about other countries? It should be the same. Stein shrugged. Of all the countries that are participating in the summit, our bilateral relationship with XIN should be the best. They have no reason to treat us differently. Evelyn couldn't help but ask, in your experience, why do you think they are so mysterious? If they're not faking this, then it must be some really astonishing information. What do you think will be? Evelyn asked. Extraterrestrial civilization. It was written on the invitation letter. Stein laughed. Be more specific. More specific, Stein sighed with a headache. After some contemplating, he shook his head. I can't guess, I don't dare to guess. The only thing I'm certain about is that it isn't something good. For the exploration of extraterrestrial civilizations, almost all countries indicated at least publicly that they would share all important information, but almost everyone knew this was impossible. For two cultures without any similarities, often the first impression determined everything. Stein asked himself if Frankberg was the first to get in touch with the extraterrestrial civilization, the first thing they would think would be to not disclose the news to other countries or even tell their allies. They would liaise with the extraterrestrial civilization alone. They would make the other party recognize their own values, recognize that Frankberg was the representative of Earth's civilization, and try their best to monopolize all channels of communication with the extraterrestrial civilization. The abnormal behavior of celestial trade only meant one thing. They encountered an issue that they couldn't resolve alone. After leaving the presidential palace, Jiang Chen went straight to the parked lure. Jiang Chen suddenly remembered Zhang Yaping's sullen face and burst into laughter. Aisha looked at him curiously when she heard the inexplicable laughter. Did something good happen? Nothing, I just suddenly wanted to laugh. Jiang Chen coughed and changed the subject. He was the president, after all. It wouldn't be nice to laugh at him like this, especially since it was his negligence for not disclosing the information to Zhang Yaping. It was understandable to not be able to digest such a large amount of information. It took half an hour before Jiang Chen barely made X2 bacteria and extraterrestrial civilizations clear to him. As for how much Zhang Yaping took in or what he felt afterward, Jiang Chen wasn't sure. The car drove onto the highway. This time, Jiang Chen didn't do anything scandalous in the car and enjoyed the beautiful night. But then, the little girl who drove suddenly smiled and spoke softly. After you go back, you better woo Sister Shiyu. She's still bothered by what happened the day before yesterday. You really gave me a problem. Jiang Chen's pleasant expression suddenly turned sour. If Aisha hadn't mentioned this, he would have almost forgotten about it. Jiang Chen got a headache when he thought about the cold tone from the last call. Is it difficult? Aisha said softly, in fact, Sister Shiyu is easy to woo. If you use some sweet talk, she will soon forget any unpleasantness. While she always looks cold, she's actually more eager than anyone else. Aisha's beautiful lips curved up again. She knew Jiang Chen could guess what she didn't say. Where did you learn these things from? Jiang Chen looked at Aisha, surprised. Aisha tilted her head and carefully thought for a moment, but it was a specious answer. Feelings. In order to leave time for Jiang Chen, Aisha used the excuse of parking to not go inside with him. The lights in the living room were off, but under the pristine moonlight, he could still see clearly. After he took off his shoes, Jiang Chen had just entered before a chilling sight immediately locked onto him from the sofa in the living room. He could smell the strong vinegar. He selectively ignored the coldness and sat next to Xia Shiyu with a grin. He reached and grabbed her around the waist. Xia Shiyu threw a temper and moved her waist, but she didn't escape from his embrace. In fact, Aisha's reminder wasn't needed at all. Jiang Chen discovered long ago that behind the cold mask was just a girl's clumsy protective color. When she fell in love with a person, what was buried behind the cold mask were emotions more passionate than anyone. In a few minutes, the tipped vinegar jar fell for his sweet talk. Xia Shiyu's pouting mouth gradually turned into a curvature before she finally giggled. Sure enough, women must be wooed. Seeing that smile, Jiang Chen was finally relieved. Xia Shiyu leaned her face against his chest and enjoyed this quiet moment. Her breathing gradually became calmer. Just when Jiang Chen thought Xia Shiyu was asleep, her muttering came from his chest. Biting her lower lip, Xia Shiyu embarrassedly whispered, "Is her chest real?" "What?" Jiang Chen tried to process that for a second. "I mean, isn't there a lot of advanced technology in the future? For example, genetic modification. Did her chest become so big in any special way?" Xia Shiyu blushed, embarrassed by her wild imagination. Sure enough, women loved to compare. Although she accepted that Jiang Chen had a woman in that world, she cared about that woman's 36D considering that Xia Shiyu just had a B. Regretfully, Jiang Chen told her with certainty that the 36D was real, but this certainly wasn't the answer Xia Shiyu wanted to hear. After a moment of indulging, Jiang Chen made a serious face and said, "To be honest, considering race restrictions, it wouldn't be so big naturally." But, Jiang Chen dragged out his tone. Xia Shiyu caught the bait. She hesitated for a moment, slightly furrowing her brows, confused. "But there are still secrets." Xia Shiyu's eyes lit up and she sat up. "What secrets?" "That, of course, is a special massage technique." Jiang Chen thought that Xia Shiyu would blush, spit out, pervert, and walk away. However, he guessed the beginning correctly, not the end. Xia Shiyu looked away with her face even redder, but she didn't get up and leave. The silence lasted for a long time between the duo. Through the moonlight, Jiang Chen saw her hand trembling before finally pressing on her own chest. Looking down, Xia Shiyu whispered. Then please." This palm-sized country once again caught the world's attention with the upcoming Outer Space Security Summit. Every day, countless reporters gathered around Future Building, the Parliament Building, the Hilton and formed a scene unique to Xian. Just as the community debated the summit topic, it was finally the day of the summit. On the morning of June 15, CBS, CCA, Reuters, Asahi News, French TV and thousands of media outlets from all over the world and tens of thousands of reporters stood outside the yellow line and gathered around the Parliament Building. The crowd even spilled onto the road. Fortunately, Koro City's magnetic levitation road prevented a traffic jam. The crowd even made people question if the representatives could squeeze in. The media set up their cameras. Just as they were ready to report news firsthand, Celestial Trade's move made them completely dumbfounded. 10 heavy-duty helicopters soared from the above, and they stopped at the open space inside the yellow line. The soldiers in kinetic skeletons rushed out from the helicopters and blocked the yellow line. It was around half a brigade of forces which immediately made the reporters wishing to break the rules reconsider their choices. After the forces were deployed, the heavy helicopters left in series. 8 small helicopters landed. When they saw the people coming out of the helicopter, the reporters were once again dumbfounded. Stein waved at the reporters, fixed his collar, and walked into the Parliament Building with his delegation. 8 helicopters continued to take off and flew to the roof of the Hilton. They appeared to be transporting representatives of other countries. The representatives didn't plan to squeeze through the crowd and decided to go directly from the air. Stein extended his right hand as he walked to Jiang Chen with enthusiasm. They shook hands. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Jiang Chen. It's been really difficult to see you. Just in the past few days, I've had a busy schedule. To make your trip worthwhile, I haven't rested for a day." Jiang Chen shook Stein's hand. Now I feel better after your explanation. Stein smiled heartily and shook his watch. Half an hour before we start, could you satisfy our curiosity in advance? Regarding the details of this summit, we've compiled two versions, one paper document and one electronic file which are now on the table. If you want to know as soon as possible, you better go in quickly. Jiang Chen smiled. With a surprised expression, Stein raised an eyebrow. Yes. Then I really have to hurry. Please. Jiang Chen made a gesture and handed the Frankfurt delegation to the conference officer waiting on the side. After the contents of the summit discussion were all sorted out in the documents, Stein didn't have the mind to engage in small talk with Jiang Chen anymore. Under the guidance of the conference officer, he quickly entered the venue with his delegation. In 15 minutes, all the delegations of the 10 countries were seated, and the gate of the parliament building was closed. Countless curious eyes were also closed off from the building. With the remaining 15 minutes of free time, representatives quickly scanned the documents in their hands. 15 minutes later, the lights in the venue were slightly dimmed. On the holographic screen in the center, Future Group and Celestial Trade's logo appeared. Shocked, surprised, and dismissive, the representatives put away the documents and turned their focus on Jiang Chen in front of the screen. As the organizer of the summit and the representative of XIN, the summit that was comprised of the most senior diplomats officially kicked off. Chapter 1087 What do you mean by only? It wasn't the first time Jiang Chen had spoken in front of an audience, but it was his first time in front of such a high-profile audience. He took a deep breath, and cleared his mind. With all eyes gathered on him, he slowly said, "There may be doubts in the minds of everyone here, whether it's regarding the topic to be discussed or the summit itself. I don't have much to say here. Taking the literal meaning, the theme of this summit is security. It's not security between countries and not related to any territorial disputes, sovereignty disputes, or politics. Don't show impatience, I'm not joking. Everyone, I'm not an alarmist, but we're on a fine line between life and death." Jiang Chen noticed that when he said this, there were whispers. From the closest representatives, he was able to clearly see their disbelief. It was just like he said something ridiculous. Jiang Chen completely expected this reaction. Although evidence about the existence of extraterrestrial civilization and acts of aggression were summarized in the documents, the audience wasn't the director of NASA or ESA but senior foreign minister of each country, after all. They weren't experts in the area. They wouldn't take everything Jiang Chen said for truth. It would take time to verify. After a moment's pause, Jiang Chen went on. Just a month ago, Celestial Trade Space Department discovered an interesting phenomenon when observing extraterrestrial planets and exploring extraterrestrial civilizations. The image on the holographic screen turned into a star map, and in the center of the star map was the Gliese 581 galaxy, 2 degrees north of the Libra Beta, Gliese 581g. According to our researchers, the planet has a 90% chance of life. The UA delegation couldn't sit still. The man sitting next to Secretary of State Kerry pressed the button next to the microphone and requested to speak. Jiang Chen didn't mind that his speech was interrupted and gestured for him to continue. The man stood up and fixed his microphone, then he put his hands on the table and looked at Jiang Chen with his eyebrows furrowed. He kept an oppressive posture and said, "NASA long ago conducted a detailed observation on the Gliese 581 galaxy 15 years ago and reached the conclusion that this blue-green pattern may contain life." Benjamin stood up straight, shrugged and said with a mocking tone, "But your researcher apparently didn't pay attention to the journal, Science. Even as a layman, I know that 4 years ago, a paper published by the University of Pennsylvania researchers in Science pointed out that the planet didn't actually exist and it was a color ray error caused by the stellar magnetic field burst of the 581d. If you want to divert the attention of the international community to your ignorance in outer space, you may wish to utilize a more realistic excuse and not blame aliens." When Benjamin said this, the venue became rattled. Although the aerospace technology of Celestial Trade was indeed powerful, the UA was also an established aerospace power. While they might be slightly inferior in terms of hardware, their soft power couldn't be underestimated. Celestial Trade just said that there was life on Gliese 581G, yet the representative of UA immediately stood up and slapped his face. If the UA proved that the planet didn't exist 4 years ago, then why did they come here for a meeting? To listen to nonsense from Celestial Trade? Anger was boiling among the representatives. After his speech ended, Benjamin didn't sit down immediately. Carey, next to him, crossed his arms and looked at Jiang Chen. He wanted to see how he defended himself in irritation. Stein raised an eyebrow and put his ballpoint pen on the table. He was very curious about how Jiang Chen, who was exposed on the spot, would defend himself. The Hua foreign minister sat in silence, the Russian foreign minister and his deputy exchanged looks. The French representative began to check his watch impatiently. Jiang Chen's calm reaction surprised Secretary of State Carey. It was too calm that almost made what just happened boring. Jiang Chen nodded at the diplomat. He cleared his throat and swept his eyes across Carey. He turned to the entire venue and raised his hand to indicate for the representatives to be settled. After the venue once again becomes silent, he raised one finger and slowly said to the UA delegation, "First of all, let me correct a mistake you made. Gliese 581G is green, and there is no blue-green pattern at all. As for why, I'll talk about that later. Does this have anything to do with it?" Benjamin requested to speak after he heard Jiang Chen's argument. This time, he didn't wait for Jiang Chen's acknowledgement. He stood up and sneered in disdain. "No matter what color it is, it doesn't exist. Furthermore, Jiang Chen interrupted him and raised a second finger. It was the middle finger next to the index finger. This time, his tone carried a hint of indifference. "Do we need to pay attention to what papers you've written?" Carey suddenly looked agitated. Delegations from other countries also focused on this side with more or less an eagerness to watch the scene unfold. Yes, with Celestial Trade's technology which could colonize Mars, was it necessary to worry about who published a paper on the planet in Science? It was like a person soon graduating from high school needing to consult with what someone wrote in an elementary school essay. However, this unadorned statement made it impossible for the UA delegates to sit still. Jiang Chen's statement wasn't euphemistic at all. It raised a giant middle finger to the UA aerospace practitioners by saying, "Everyone here is rubbish." Benjamin opened his mouth without a show of expression, but anyone could guess the embarrassment on his mind. "I just mentioned that Gliese 581G is green, and now I will prove it to you." Jiang Chen knocked twice on the touchpad of the podium, and soon, the image on the holographic screen behind him was cut onto an enlarged star map. The center of the star map was locked on the galaxy 2 degrees north of the Libra Beta. The white box locked the orange-red star, then continued to zoom. The lens focused on that star until the red star filled half the screen. Stein narrowed his eyes as the light was too bright. However, this discomfort didn't last long, and soon, the star on the screen was dimmed as if some kind of filter was added. The light continued to decay until there were several black spots visible to the naked eye around the star. Benjamin's eyes almost popped out as he stared at the image in front of him. He already knew what Jiang Chen was doing, but it was impossible. Even if he was a layman, he knew it was absolutely impossible to directly capture a planet image 20.5 light-years away. Only stars could be directly observed by telescopes. Most of the planets outside the solar system required various techniques such as spectroscopy to measure the planetary data, and then computers would be used to draw a rough concept map. To put it into perspective, it was easy for someone to see a light bulb hundreds of meters away, but it was impossible to see mosquitoes on the light bulb, no matter how powerful the telescope was. Even with a filter to dim the light, it was impossible to change the fact that the planet itself shouldn't shine. Are you kidding? Using computer animation to fool people? Eyes locked onto the black dots with Gliese 581 as the background, Benjamin snarled in his heart. However, Jiang Chen's nonchalant words shattered his fantasies. It's almost at the limit. The optical observation resolution of Celestial City Astronomy Telescope can only observe up till this point. It might not be visible to the naked eye, but I can tell you with certainty that those pixels are indeed green. Only. What do you mean by only? As soon as this statement came out, the audience was astounded. Do we need to pay attention to what papers you've written? Jiang Chen's nonchalant words were a slap to the aggressive Benjamin. The image that appeared next on the holographic screen was a slap to the aerospace science community. Even Secretary of State Kerry couldn't sit still anymore. Fortunately, at this time, Nippon requested to speak and question celestial trade. Even if you could prove that there's life on Gliese 581G, it only shows that we aren't alone in the universe. From your tone, you seem to be certain that the extraterrestrial creature on Gliese 581G will be a threat. Can you prove this? According to our point of view, it's possible that those unintelligent creatures might not have even formed a civilization yet, let alone crossed the distance of 20 light-years. The question from the Nippon representative was the concern of most of the representatives. Based on the analysis celestial trade provided, the solar wind of Gliese 581 was several times stronger than the solar wind on Earth, and Gliese 581 has no magnetic field protection, which meant that the entire Gliese 581G planet was being constantly bombarded by EMP. Even if those arthropods could breed a civilization, they could only develop into a society similar to ants and bees at most. They were just bugs. The United Kingdom agrees with the argument put forward by the Nippon representative. Even if we might have a war with them someday in the future, it's definitely a colonial war on their territory. British diplomats got up and snarled, "Are you that worried?" Jiang Chen laughed when he heard the two representatives' opinions. It's a pity that X2 bacteria didn't seem to teach you a lesson. The British diplomat's face suddenly turned red. The fiasco in Finnish tundra became a stain that the British Army couldn't erase. Although the nest was eradicated with the help of celestial trade space-based weapons and Power Amor Brigade and the British finally regained some dignity, the brigade commander sent to Finland was still dismissed due to improper calculations of enemy strength. Even the British Prime Minister was almost impeached because of the high casualty figures. As a result, the X2 bacteria had forever become a pain in the hearts of the British. As for proof, the last few pages of the documents in your hands record the comparative analysis of the X2 bacterial DNA intercepted fragments and partial fragments of the T-virus RNA. I believe that anyone with some biology background will find the comparison to be unusual. This is very easy to verify. I believe that you all obtained samples of the nest. You mean that X2 bacteria and T-virus are works of an extraterrestrial civilization? Kerry frowned. How did they do it? This is another focus of this meeting. Jiang Chen scanned around the delegates in the room, then he pulled out a black sphere and gently placed it beside the microphone. Have you ever heard of the golden apple of the Rothschild family? When they saw the black sphere placed on the podium, the accompanying diplomats except for the foreign ministers were confused. They didn't understand why Jiang Chen suddenly placed a golf ball on the podium and were more confused about why he suddenly mentioned the word golden apple. Obviously, all countries adopted a confidential stance toward the golden apple, only the country's Minister of Foreign Affairs or the Secretary of State would have this information. Otherwise, there would be no chance to learn more about the golden apple. That was also very understandable. After all, the source of the golden apple wasn't the clearest, it came from the notorious Seventh Institute. Any country with a strong human rights code must avoid having a stain on their image. While they certainly did experiments, they must be done in secrecy. What's more was that the item was the key to communicating with the future, and its impact on society was still unknown. For various reasons, countries all chose to remain confidential and hide the golden apple from public view. Many people knew Rothschild Bank was suspected of supporting human experiments, but they knew nothing about what the Seventh Institute experimented on. The golden apple is my next focus. Jiang Chen scanned all the foreign ministers. Word by word, he said, "This has never been used as a time machine and this has never been used to communicate with the future, or else, the Freemasonry would never have lost. As for what it is." Jiang Chen picked up the golden apple and played with it in his hand. He grinned. "Think about it. What did Carmen bring before he died? Why did the nest appear in Finland, not Frankfurt?" The audience was rattled again once again. This time, it wasn't because of shock but because of panic. It seemed like Jiang Chen was not holding the golden apple, but holding an atomic bomb in his hand. Although Jiang Chen wasn't explicit, no one was too stupid to not understand the connections. Everyone knew what he suggested. Golden apple was the culprit of the birth of the nest. And now, it is in the hands of a madman. And he is playing with it. Carey, Stein, and other foreign ministers were sweating profusely. When they thought that the golden apples that were smuggled into their own countries were being played with by the group of researchers unfearful of death, their hearts pounded. They couldn't wait to make phone calls back home. The world witnessed the terrifying power of the nest. Fortunately, the last time the nest appeared in the tundra in northern Finland. If it appeared near a major metropolis, the consequences would be simply unimaginable. Among the people present, the most nervous was the foreign minister of Hua. With the population density of the country, it would be a disaster. Even if this matter was still inconclusive, at least the research site must be moved to the desert to prevent the worst from happening. As for how the golden apple caused the X2 bacterial incident, it could be a subject for future study. Studying the expressions of the representatives, Jiang Chen already knew that he fulfilled half of the goals he set. He trusted that the information he provided was daunting enough. The next step was to wait for the foreign ministers to bring back the news of the summit and discuss it domestically. Then the heads of states would sit together to finalize what was accepted by all. Jiang Chen admitted that he didn't have the aura to make everyone swear allegiance to him. He also never expected to rely on a summit to make a strong impression so that the heads of state would bow to worship him. They would form the Earth Alliance, and all human beings would be united. Throughout the history of the world, there had never been a unity without blood. To be honest, Jiang Chen was already prepared for war. He was busy preparing for the T3 power armor production line at Celestial Trade. Of course, if they could reach a consensus peacefully, that would be the best. Now, he still had one last card in his hand. Seeing that the representatives couldn't sit still, Jiang Chen was also debating if he should play the card now. We can set an example in destroying golden apples. In addition, I have a report here. Jiang Chen shook the papers in his hand. You can study it after your return. The meeting lasted for 3 full hours, and the summit's agenda today finally came to an end. When Jiang Chen announced the conclusion of the summit, the foreign ministers left the venue at the fastest speed after they received the documents from Celestial Trade. For them, the most important task on hand now was to communicate with their leaders and pass back the information they received. The reporters waiting outside the parliament building were bound to be disappointed. The foreign ministers didn't give them any opportunity to interview. They stepped into the helicopters and immediately departed. Obviously, the summit's agenda wasn't to be disclosed to the public. At least not today. The reporters outside the parliament building put away their cameras and left the scene one after another. Although they were reluctant, they now accepted the fact that they waited for nothing. However, many reporters still noticed an unusual expression from the foreign ministers. Their expressions were all serious and somber. Or anxious. The reporters who noticed this were contemplating the reason. They were trying to dig out valuable information to get back to their bosses. What made the foreign ministers so anxious? Instincts told them that there was a lot of information hidden, but they wouldn't ever know that it was because of the document Jiang Chen gave the ministers in the end. It was an astronomical observation report. After confirming signs of life on Gliese 581G, Kelvin took the astronomical observation team to conduct a carpet search on the space outside the Gliese 581 galaxy. Based on Jiang Chen's opinion, they focused on the observations of the asteroid belts outside the stellar system. Soon, they found something that became scary after facts were obtained from those asteroid belts. Among the asteroid belts between the Earth and Gliese 581g, they observed an unnaturally formed vacuum. 2 days passed since the first round of consultation, and it had been 2 days since the document was sent to the UA. On June 17, in the conference room of NASA's headquarters, a bunch of bureaucrats who rarely visited gathered there. Even the President and the Minister of Defense made a visit which surprised NASA. Even though NASA had recently gained some attention because of the popularity of aerospace projects, rarely did the top officials all visit together. This scene was only possible during an era of an arms race. "Do you need a cup of coffee?" "No." Hill shook her head with a sullen face, and the aide sitting next to her no longer spoke. It was the day of the results. Although they could have waited in their office, after they heard such shocking facts, how could they sit still? Just then, the door of the conference room was pushed open and Bolden hurried in. A dozen eyes gathered on him. Bolden took a deep breath and threw the documents in his arms on the conference table, working up the courage to disclose the results. "The observation results are out." "What are the results?" Hill immediately asked, while constantly praying in her heart that the outcome with a possibility of 1 in 10,000 wasn't a reality. However, she knew that would just be self-deception. The bitter smile on Bolden's face already explained many problems. "The data mostly matched with the data provided by Celestial Trade," Bolden said. Hill was silent, and the entire conference room was silent. They were previously optimistic. After all, with the existing astronomical observation means, it was impossible to carry out such detailed mapping. Many people even wondered if this was false information fabricated by Celestial Trade. However, while eyes could lie, the data couldn't. What's more, the other party even provided the detailed astronomical coordinates of the asteroid belt in the file and gave each country the opportunity for verification. The NASA researchers took the information and immediately used the Hubble Space Telescope to observe the coordinate area. Although they couldn't create a star map as detailed, based on multiple sets of data obtained by the Hubble Space Telescope, NASA obtained the same result 3 times. A vacuum was observed in many asteroid belts between the Earth and Gliese 581g. It was obviously impractical to attribute this to nature's ingenuity, and there was only one possibility to explain this phenomenon. Something must have traveled through the belts. And the size and speed of that thing weren't small. What do you think is the most likely explanation for the vacuum belt? Hill gulped. "Their footprints," Bolden said with an ugly expression. "The footprints of a beast passing through snow." "I have the same opinion as you." Looked grimly, Carter felt the sweat in his palms. He admitted that he was a Star Wars fan when he was young, and his bedroom was filled with posters of Independence Day. He even imagined that he could be a pilot who drove a fighter jet into an alien spaceship. But he never thought that he would really become enemies with the aliens. As the Minister of Defense, "What do you think our odds are?" Hill looked at Carter. Carter didn't answer this question directly, but said with a forced smile, "What do you think about Iraq's chance of defeating us?" Hill also forced a smile. Nowadays, the aircraft carrier of the extraterrestrial civilization already set off. They couldn't even create a ship to set sail. As for the battle on their home front, after witnessing the horror of the nest, who could work up the courage to face a swarm of mutants? Compared to defeating them, I'm afraid it would be more practical to build a spaceship to escape. Bolden shook his head and ridiculed himself, but he didn't see that all eyes were focused on him again. "That's indeed an idea. Yes, at least the president can be kept alive, just like Air Force One. And we can bring some people to preserve seeds for the UA and even human civilization." Seeing that everyone reacted to his own words and his colleagues had begun to discuss how to escape, Bolden was sweating as he quickly said, do you think Congress will approve this budget? Using the taxpayers' money to allow the president to run away? Those Congress members aren't crazy yet. 1 inch that's not necessary. Hill, who didn't speak until now, suddenly spoke. Compared to Bolden, who rose to his position as an astronaut, Hill's political sense was undoubtedly more sensitive. She knew who the Capitol really served, and she knew who she should really please. Congress members don't want to die. The wealthy people on Wall Street don't want to die. We don't even have to raise money from Congress. Hill's chief of staff also followed. With a glimpse of hope appearing in their pupils, Hill and her own chief of staff continued, "We only need to set up a Noah's Ark fund and promise investors a ticket." 3. Everyone's eyes lit up. Yes. As long as they could convince those rich people to board the ship, how difficult would it be to raise funds? However, the door was pushed open, and Hill's assistant ran inside. "What's so urgent?" While she wasn't pleased, Hill maintained a president's demeanor as she asked. 1 inch people are holding a demonstration in front of the Capitol. "I'm hoping you can explain," the assistant said with sweat droplets all over his forehead. 2 inch explain what? Hill frowned. The assistant didn't answer. He opened the news page and handed the phone to Hill. When Hill took the phone, she already felt something wasn't right. But the instant she saw the headlines, her mood suddenly plunged to the bottom. Her wrinkles were even more visible because of anger. She was ready to curse out any second. Despicable. According to informed sources, Celestial City Space Department successfully observed extraterrestrial civilization on Gliese 581G, initially determined to be an arthropod carbon-based life. The civilization is capable of interplanetary navigation. On June 15, the senior foreign ministers of 10 countries gathered in Coro City to discuss countermeasures against aggression by extraterrestrial civilizations. According to the diplomat who didn't want to disclose his name and nationality, the foreign ministers at the summit voted on the resolution of evacuation from the solar system. Although the resolution wasn't passed, it received a very high number of votes at the meeting. X2 bacteria in Finland were made by extraterrestrial civilization, and the nest was an alien aggression outpost. Jiang Chen proposed to keep the meeting confidential, but he also leaked the news with mixed lies and truths. The reason was simple. He knew that once governments realized that it was impossible to defend against aggression, escapism would prevail among the elites. 1. There was no need to analyze the reasons at all. The history of the apocalypse was a lesson in itself. Once these elites found themselves, with no chance of winning, presented with a seemingly better choice, it would be impossible to expect them to fight to the death. If they fought, it would be difficult to win. If they escaped, the probability of survival would be quite high. After all, it would still be a long time before Harmony's space colonization ship arrived. The elites ultimately decided what the GDP favored. There would be 2 separate technology trees depending on if a battleship or escape ship was favored. The most likely outcome was building a battleship while preparing for their escape path, and more effort would probably be spent on escape. It was the simplest decision to make. The elites must think for the elites. Despite the difference in culture, the principle was universal. Take the UA as an example. Even if the senior officials of the current Democratic Party, such as Hill, wouldn't live to see the day Harmony arrived, they still must have considerations for their own political career. The Wall Street consortiums that controlled the politics of the country also manipulated the military. Would they be happy to learn that their days were numbered? What would be the significance of the wealth they accumulated since the colonial era? If Hill dared to stop them from building a ship to escape, her scandals would make the headlines on the Washington Post the next day, followed by impeachment from the Congress up till the eventual re-election. Not only the UA, but also countries such as Hua and Russia all held the same view. The only difference between them was the level of formality. If they couldn't reach an agreement on the most fundamental issues, then this war against all mankind would be lost from the beginning. With public opinion stirred in a certain direction, the controversy continued to escalate. Not just Washington, London, Paris, but even Coro City saw protests. People held slogans and stepped out onto the streets to ask the government to disclose details of the Outer Space Security Summit. The focus of public opinion was nothing but 2 points. One was related to whether the T virus and the X2 bacteria were related to the aggression of the extraterrestrial civilization. The other was whether the representatives really discussed the construction of a Noah's Arkansas. Under pressure from public opinion, Secretary of State Kerry was the first to clarify. In front of the media, he repeatedly reiterated that the topic of extraterrestrial civilization was indeed discussed at the summit, but the resolution on an escape from solar system wasn't discussed. Even if was discussed, the UA would never vote in favor of such a selfish resolution. One, however, simple clarification was obviously not enough to dispel the public's concerns. Everyone knew that politicians were the unruliest. They used a set of rhetoric in front of the public while another kind of rhetoric behind closed doors. After several organized protests, the people in demonstrations unanimously demanded that the next summit must be public to the world. The media had the right to exercise supervision. The people had the indisputable right to know. The situation in all countries was similar. Even demonstrations didn't happen in a few countries, the heated discussions online already told the same story. Jiang Chen wasn't too concerned about the demonstration that happened in Coro City. The next meeting was scheduled for mid-July, when controversial issues such as the formation of the Earth Federation and the fight against extraterrestrial civilization would be discussed. Jiang Chen gave the governments enough time to digest the information they learned from the last meeting to then make a choice. On the second Saturday after the meeting, Jiang Chen took the space elevator to Celestial City. Since the beginning of May, celestial trade space-related industries began to migrate to Celestial City. The ground command center in the northern part of the equator finally ended its historical mission. The personnel and equipment were all moved to Celestial City, occupying a separate external space station adjacent to the shipyard of future heavy industries. In the vicinity of this area, an aerospace industrial park was built. Not only assets of Future Group were located there, but factories invested by other countries were also located there. The factories mainly produced small and medium-sized spacecraft or aerospace equipment and accessories, directly or indirectly providing 27,000 jobs for Celestial City. After getting off the elevator at the terminal, Jiang Chen took the express to the Space Department. Kelvin was already waiting at the door. When he saw Jiang Chen, he immediately greeted him and welcomed him into the Space Department. Because of Gliese 581G in the invasion of the extraterrestrial civilization, Kelvin's hair almost turned white. His subordinates didn't see their bosses smile for a long time. But today, he wasn't only smiling but ecstatic. If you asked why, it was an important day today. Just an hour ago, the colonization ship that flew to Mars successfully reached the orbit of Mars and hovered directly above the landing point. The first colonial chamber could land on Mars with Jiang Chen's orders and take the first step of mankind to the stars. While walking on the way to the command center, Jiang Chen learned about the colonization ship from Kelvin. What's the situation with the colonists? All the colonists have successfully woken up from the hibernation chamber. They're in good health. The colonial chamber function is normal and entered the final deployment stage. Kelvin was overjoyed. What are we waiting for? Jiang Chen pushed open the door of the command center. He looked up at the big screen in the center at the red-stained land. This moment finally arrived. Jiang Chen took a deep breath and calmed down his mind. He placed the order for this historic mission in the command center with great excitement. SS Heavenly Temple, initiate landing sequence. Wang Chang took a deep breath, he calmed the excitement and anxiousness pumping in his chest. He peeked outside the window at the red-stained land. The plan was to spend the rest of his life on this new planet. Stop gasping or we'll be out of oxygen soon. The man sitting across from him joked. There was a friendly laugh in the chamber, and the nervous atmosphere dissipated. More than 80 million kilometers away, the blue planet was no longer visible here. Although the moment they set foot on the colonization ship, they were ready to dedicate this life to the aerospace industry. But when they recalled life on Earth, the 20 colonists couldn't stop reminiscing about life on the homeland. No one knew what would be waiting for them. They weren't only the pioneers to colonize Mars, but they were also the first to set foot on this land. No matter how many space agencies conducted observations on this planet before, no one dared to declare they knew 100% of the planet before a human set his footprint on this foreign land. However, the thought of colonizing new land for human civilization brought them some comfort. The colonization ship entered the synchronous orbit and stopped directly above the landing point. The captain could order landing sequence with an order from the command center. Wang Qian relaxed and sank into the cushion of the seat. He closed his eyes and planned to take a nap. However, an hour passed after he opened his eyes again. All personnel, the command center has issued a landing order, and the colonial chamber will be separated from the colonization ship in 10 seconds. Enter the landing stage. Countdown, 10, 9, 8, so fast. When Wang Chang opened his eyes, he heard the countdown. Without being mentally prepared, he felt anxious. But the colonization ship didn't give him a chance to be flustered as the countdown quickly reached to 0. With a slight jitter, the SS Heavenly Temple was divided into two, and the 200-meter-long chamber began to separate from the hull. Looking from far away, the entire colonial chamber resembled a flat cuboid. Under the traction of 6 ion engines, it fell toward the red-stained land. Mars's orbit was only 17,000 kilometers in distance, while its gravity was only 4/9 of that on Earth. The density of the atmosphere was thin. The landing difficulty was slightly higher than on the Moon, but it was much easier than the Earth. While the chamber maintained a downward-sloping posture, the moment it came in contact with the atmosphere, 6 engines ignited with powerful propulsion rays. They dragged the chamber and stopped the acceleration of the fall. The high-temperature ions surrounded the chamber tightly. From a distance, it looked like a blue meteor. In the air, there was an arc. The 200-meter-long flat cuboid, like a giant foot, descended from the sky and made an imprint on the land. Boom! With a muffled sound, the red sand was sent into the air by the collision. The thick thigh-sized steel needle popped from the bottom of the chamber and nailed into the red sand directly into the rock formation tens of meters deep. They firmly pinned the chamber onto the desert and acted as the foundation. After deployment on land was completed, deployment still continued. The colonization ship with its chamber detached was still orbiting in the synchronous orbit. In the next 10 years, it would serve as a satellite to provide communication, meteorological observation and crisis warning for the colony. At this point, the chamber deployment process was finally completed. The vibration outside stopped, and the lights in the cabin lit up. When light returned to his field of vision, Wang Chang frantically looked around and breathlessly looked at the captain sitting on the left-hand side across from him. He was thrilled. Did we succeed? The expression on the captain's face was the same. Even if he wasn't an animated person, he was moved by the excitement and sense of glory from the bottom of his heart. Not just the captain, but all 20 colonists felt the same glory. They received training for nearly a year, and they practiced day and night for this very day. Yes, we succeeded. With a deep breath, the captain controlled his overflowing excitement and ordered in his trembling voice, "All personnel pay attention. Release the security lock. Sacro, go check the oxygen system. Lu Yang, go to the power room and turn on our nuclear fusion generator, we don't have much energy in the battery." Yes. Understood. After the two men unlocked the safety lock, they leaped down from their seats and walked quickly outside the room. The security lock was also unlocked. The captain stood in the middle of the buffer cabin and moved his sore arms. He looked at the colonists who had already lined up and ordered, "Yang Yuhan, deploy the exploration drone and conduct a detailed investigation of the geological conditions within a 10-mile radius. Lu Rui, Wang Cheng, prepare for patrol. Chris, you and I will go to the main control room. The rest of the personnel, immediately enter your positions. Time is tight and it is necessary to complete deployment of the planting unit within 4 hours. This is critical to address our food problem. Yes. The colonists shouted in unison and acted immediately. After all the orders were executed, the captain didn't leave the buffer cabin immediately. Instead, he reached out to the holographic screen and switched the communication channel to Earth tens of millions of kilometers away. With his fingers trembling, he sent back news of success to his previous home. Calling the ground command center, we succeeded. We succeeded. When the voice was transmitted back to Celestial City more than 80 million kilometers away, the entire command center erupted in cheers, celebrating the moment in joy. People whistled, threw their arms in the air, hugged together, and celebrated this great moment. Looking at the colony in the center of the screen, Jiang Chen was more excited than anyone. If the moon was an energy base, then Mars was the arsenal of the future Earth Federation. Mars was a large iron ore and the endless desert wasn't silica on Earth but iron oxide. To be more direct, if they took a shovel to any place on Mars and tossed the sand in a blast furnace, a pound of steel could be produced. If they wanted to build a galactic ship larger than SS Seagull, they would need 1 million tons of steel. The minerals on Earth and asteroids would just barely be enough. But if they wanted to build an invincible fleet, it wouldn't be impossible with the Mars colony for steel production. As an important part of Jiang Chen's space program, the future Mars Industrial Park would bear more than 80% of the shipbuilding capacity of the Earth Federation. The Earth would finally gain a fighting chance against the imminent invasion. In order to celebrate this historic moment, Jiang Chen announced in the heat of the moment, all employees involved in the Mars colonization program will be rewarded 500,000 XIN new dollars per person regardless of their position. This money will come out of my pocket. The big red envelope pushed the cheering in the command center to a new peak. Chapter 1092 Mars Plan. The colonial chamber was like a building lying on its side. As the center of the entire colony, it was where the colonists lived, worked, socialized and entertained in an array of facilities. Around the colonial chamber, there were also 4 spherical buildings made out of graphene material, connected to the colonial chamber by giant pipes. The 4 spherical buildings were the lifeline of the entire colony. Mars was a planet covered by desert and volcanic ash which gives off an impression of being extremely dry. However, the opposite was true. As early as a few years ago, the Curiosity rover sent back data that suggested the planet was actually rich in water resources. However, most of the water was brine and buried underground or mixed with the sand so it could not be directly consumed. But for celestial trade, it was not a problem. As long as there was water, there must be a way to turn it into drinkable water. The 4 spherical buildings served as the water pumps that filtered the water. The location of the colony was chosen on an ancient lake bed. There were definitely no shortages of water. The 4 spherical water pumps first pumped the underground brine into spherical storage tanks, filtered the water, and finally pumped the water through the pipeline into the colony. Water was the source of life. Achieving self-sufficiency in drinking water was the key to achieving self-sufficiency for the colony. After the water, oxygen was next. The oxygen content of Mars was extremely low. Through the billions of years, the oxygen either escaped or reacted with the iron to form iron oxide. Fortunately, there was still an atmosphere on the planet. There was no oxygen but a sufficient amount of carbon dioxide. Therefore, it would be easier to create oxygen here than on the Moon because it does not need to use energy-extensive electrolysis. Since there was no helium-3 on the planet, energy generation remained quite expensive. Oxygen could also be created with food. The main components of the Martian atmosphere was carbon dioxide, nitrogen, oxygen and water vapor were almost negligible. For animals, it was hell, but for plants, it was paradise. Of course, it was not to say that plants can be grown on Mars. The surface of Mars was extremely cold, and plants experienced photosynthetic acclimation by being exposed to a pure carbon dioxide environment, which would ultimately hinder crop growth. However, as long as the carbon dioxide concentration of the plantation was controlled by nitrogen, it is easy to keep the crops in the plantation with the optimal carbon dioxide concentration. With a controlled water supply and ultraviolet light, the growth rate of crops will be impeccable. The only shortcoming is that early investment is extremely high. For the ration of 20 people, the cost of the facility exceeded 100 million xin new dollars. On Earth, the same equivalent dollar amount is enough to create a few 100,000 acres of fertile land. Jiang Chen still planned to position the Mars colony as an industrial base. Once the shipbuilding yard of future heavy industries moved to Mars, celestial trade could build a few more SS Seagull classes to transport food. It would be a waste of resources to build a farm in the desert. Lunar City offered the advantage of low electricity costs, and it was understandable to plant some food to ease supply pressure. Without helium, free and pure water on Mars though, food production would be extremely expensive. Of course, Jiang Chen considered transforming Mars into a terrestrial planet before. Or not just him, someone had proposed a plan to transform Mars long ago. The most famous of the proposals was from SpaceX Elon Musk, who has been obsessed with Mars. The man was certainly a genius as he once proposed a shocking method by launching nuclear bombs at the poles of Mars. Nuclear explosion would melt the dry ice, thicken the atmosphere, cause the greenhouse effect, melt more dry ice, and continue to thicken the atmosphere. The key to this idea was to use the nuclear bombs to start the greenhouse effect. While it did sound unrealistic, it made sense in theory, a simple and yet effective solution. However, Jiang Chen did not take long to give up the idea. The method was simply too slow. While it was easy to start the greenhouse effect, it was not possible to achieve the end result without the process taking thousands of years. More importantly, the uncertainty of the plan was too high. Mars was the most important part of Celestial Trade's plan to build its invincible fleet in the future. If something unexpected happens, then there was no going back and reloading the save. Of course, although Jiang Chen gave up the idea to change the Mars landscape in the short term, this did not mean he has completely abandoned the plan to transform Mars into a terrestrial planet. North of the colonial chamber was the plantation. Except for the main chamber, it is the largest building in the entire colony. It is connected by pipelines to the water storage tanks. In the plantation with an area of about 2 acres, there was also a small biological laboratory. 2 of the 20 colonists were biologists, and Jiang Chen gave them a difficult but honorable task. To develop a bacterium that could survive in the Mars environment. This kind of bacteria must be anaerobic, must adapt to a low-gravity environment, can resist low temperatures, and be capable of generating heat, but also be able to withstand the continuous exposure of ultraviolet light. This superbacterium sounds like a fantasy, but Jiang Chen, who witnessed the history of harmony, is optimist about the future of biological engineering. However, there will be a high chance he won't be able to live to the day when Mars will be covered in grass. This would be a millennium project. He would only start the project and leave it to the future generations to complete the work. Before recreating the clear and blue sky of Mars 4.3 billion years ago, he must build factories in this desert, and use steel and blood to create peace for the next generation. After leaving the command center, Jiang Chen received a call from the presidential palace. Just half an hour ago, the capital called the presidential palace and expressed its willingness to start the second round of negotiations. However, they proposed an additional condition that appeared reasonable. Since it was a matter of the fate of Earth, it should not be a closed-door discussion of several countries but discussed by everyone. All countries should discuss and formulate strategies against the extraterrestrial civilization. In short, the meeting should be done at the United Nations. The capital just called, and then the United Kingdom and France also expressed the same intention. They also added, the condition is the premise of the next round of negotiations. The implication is that if this matter is not discussed at the United Nations, then we will not participate. Jiang Chen sneered at the news. He knew exactly what these people were planning. The capital held a firm grasp on the United Nations. Out of the 5 permanent members, 2 of the members shared the same opinion as the UA. Discussions at the United Nations seemed fair, but it was actually a trap. Without the need to think, once this issue is discussed at the United Nations, it is absolutely impossible to come up with any results. First of all, CIN does not have equal power with the UA. Then, celestial trade is not even qualified to appear in the United Nations. Without the company that discovered the extraterrestrial civilization, what's the proposed to meet with a bunch of small countries without any understanding of aerospace? If the United Nations really possessed any power, North Korea would have long given up nuclear weapons. I made the space elevator, I created the moon colony, I generated the trillion-dollar aerospace industry in celestial trade, I even offered to mine asteroids together. Now I have to go to your place to discuss how to use the stuff at my place. Let you be the boss. Do you really think NASA is still the NASA from the Nixon era? Jiang Chen, without any hesitation, immediately made a decision. Go to the United Nations for a meeting? No problem. Just get our ambassador to go meet with them. When Zhang Yaping heard Jiang Chen's words, he immediately understood the implication. If he was an innocent man 3 years ago, he had long become a qualified politician. It was the UN General Assembly, and it was a discussion of an important matter. While the president didn't have to make a visit, at least a senior official should attend the meeting. Based on Jiang Chen's decision, an ambassador at the consulate should go. It meant that the ambassador wouldn't even have the right to represent the country to speak. He simply meant, you can do whatever you want and I don't care. But Zhang Yaping quickly made sense of the reason, even if he went there, he would not have a say. In this case, what would be the difference between sending someone else? However, it wasn't just that, Jiang Chen was not done. What is the date of the UN General Assembly? July 2nd. How about this, at the end of June, visit Hua, Russia, and Frankfurt to strengthen the economic and trade cooperation. Bring a group of entrepreneurs from CIN and throw out the bait of the magnetic levitating highway. I don't need you to do anything when you visit, just try to subtly hint their leaders. Zhang Yaping, who still had doubts in his mind, immediately understood the implication. His eyes brightened and the doubt in his eyes disappeared. After Jiang Chen finished, he nodded. Okay, I'll get that prepared as soon as possible. Aha, thank you. Jiang Chen closed his eyes and sneered after he hung up. Since you want to play tricks with me, then I'll play with you. Without the UA, Britain, and France, this summit will still continue. Just don't regret it then. Once he was no longer emotional, Jiang Chen frowned, and suddenly began to feel doubt. To be honest, he was not surprised that the UA used their allies to put pressure on celestial trade. He just didn't understand that if the capital knew his personality and knew that he won't compromise, why would they add this premise to the second round of negotiations? From this perspective, it was something intriguing. They clearly didn't want to talk. The news of celestial trade's colonization ship successfully arriving on Mars, and that 20 colonists successfully settling on Mars spread to every corner of the world in just a few hours. When the Mars colonization program was first announced, many people were eager to see celestial trade fail. Without the first step of landing on Mars, they began to think about building a colony. However, the facts disappointed the doubters. With Mars being full of iron oxide, iron ores were as worthless as sand and countless people drooled over the Mars colony. However, they could only drool. With the same method they advertised the moon colony, celestial trade placed a journalist among the 20 colonists to capture the life of the colonists. The photographs and videos were edited by the marketing department and placed on Celestial Trade's official website. These videos and photos immediately accumulated tens of millions of views in less than a day, and were forwarded to all major social media sites. They caused a sensation on the internet and even overtook the popularity of the Outer Space Security Summit. Even Mars has been colonized. What can stop Celestial Trade from going further? Some people exclaimed. Damn, we didn't even get to go on the moon yet and they have already claimed Mars. The good places are being robbed by them, this is not okay. Someone cursed. Sigh, when Celestial Trade recruited space volunteers, I applied for it. But when I saw the Mars colonization program, I gave up the idea. Now life on Mars doesn't look as bad as I imagined, some people admired. Not just on videos, Celestial Trade made the photos available on their official website for anyone to retransmit. Intentional or not, amongst the photos, there was a photo that was particularly intriguing. In the photo, several colonists wearing spacesuits stood shoulder to shoulder, in a row, posing in front of the camera for a group photo. The pose of the colonists in the photo itself was completely fine, but the problem was the background, the rover behind them. It was Curiosity, launched in 2011. Compared with the astronauts who posed in front of it, it looked like a large toy. Clumsy, bloated, and unappealing. The meaning of the photo was of course positive, symbolizing the friendship between the countries. No matter from which point of view, it was just a good photo. However, the UA media chose to remain silent and selectively ignored this photo. Controversy only appeared among the netizens. This photo full of malicious intention was a demand from Jiang Chen as to why. I am pitiful. These days, Jiang Chen stayed in Celestial City. He would either go to the command center and observe the Mars colony or take a stroll in Celestial Trade to take in the beauty of the city full of technology. They were approaching the end of the month. With the first exploration site built in the Mars colony, the Stingray A-1 sent to the UFO for investigation, ended its journey of nearly 3 months. In a suspense-filled moment, the deceleration was completed before the fuel was exhausted as it barely entered the orbit. Because of the top-secret nature of the flight and the major events that happened recently, Celestial Trade couldn't hold a grand welcoming ceremony for this hero. He could only be sneaked into the port of Celestial Trade. However, Jiang Chen was never the kind of person who would make his subordinates feel aggrieved. In recognition of the brave performance of the pilot, Jiang Chen personally awarded him the Golden Eagle Medal. It was almost the highest glory of the Celestial Trade Air Force. With such a medal, his career progression will be smooth sailing. As long as he didn't make too many mistakes, he could be a captain before the age of 40. In addition to the medal, a bonus of 1 million XIN new dollars was awarded to him in the form of a year-end bonus. On the one hand, his behavior was indeed worthy of praise, but on the other hand, it was a fee to keep the information confidential. The 100-kilogram sphere finally arrived in Celestial City. Jiang Chen already couldn't wait to see what it was. June 27, 2019, Wang Chang wrote the date at the top of his journal. He sniffed and looked outside the window. The sky was blocked by a sandstorm. The days on Mars were only 37 minutes longer than Earth. Based on 24-hour time, it should be around 3 in the afternoon, but it was dusk here. After the initial excitement, the excitement of landing of Mars already faded. Life on Mars was boring, communication resources were precious, and of course it was impossible to use the internet. Before the completion of the large-scale communication base station, each person only had 10 minutes of telephone time per day to call their relatives and friends on Earth. It was the only way for them to obtain information. Without the internet, it was torture for modern-day people. It meant that he couldn't use Twitter, nor could he wear a phantom helmet to dive into the virtual world. Almost half of all entertainment methods were crossed off for him. For Wang Chang, his daily entertainment was listening to pop music. Lying in bed and reading web novels, the rhythm of life seemed to slow down. It was the same for most others. They would find something they liked to do in their spare time. Fortunately, one of the 20 colonists in the colony was a chef who specialized in 4 cuisine types. The reserves in the colonial chamber were quite rich, and they could cook any type of meals every day. Ever since, eating became one of their few entertainments. In order to boost the morale of the colonists, the captain assured them that he would request to the command center at the end of this month to bring more chefs in the next group of colonists. On the one hand, they had to balance the diet of people from different cultures, on the other hand, they could not eat the same thing forever. The dust storm outside the window was growing stronger, but Wang Chang was not bothered and continued to write things down. It was a habit that he developed after he came to Mars, mainly to pass time. As for why he was so calm, he knew that as long as it was not a level 13 typhoon, the sandstorm just couldn't move his anchored vehicle. The sandstorms on Mars, since they started to be tracked, were only as powerful as level 12 typhoon equivalent. Before being sent to Mars, he was a geological worker for future mining. And of course, now too. The only one mission assigned to him by the command center was to survey the geological information of Mars, find minerals, and assess the reserves of groundwater. While it was possible to produce steel with any shovel of sand, the heavy industrial industry required more than just steel. Elements such as aluminum, manganese, chromium, cobalt and nickel were all covered by a layer of iron oxide. The colonization ship orbiting on the synchronous orbit scanned the geological information of the area. Based to the topographical features on the topographic map, he identified several locations where deposits and groundwater enrichment areas may exist. And his task for the next month was to inspect these mines on the Mars rover and complete the final works on geological information mapping. Although he did not imagine this to be an easy job, the hardships of the planet's conditions still exceeded his expectations. The entirety of Mars was a desert with no obstructions at all. It was the 5th time he encountered a sandstorm today. If the colonization ship above his head didn't continuously monitoring weather data, he didn't have the courage to get off the rover. Mars' climate was volatile and sandstorms came fast but also went fast. When the wind indicator returned to a safe level, the dim sky finally reappeared. Due to the thin atmosphere, dust particles were larger. Because of the Mie scattering effect, the dust scattered red light of the same wavelength. The sky was red in the direction without the sun, and the sky was blue in the direction of the sun. Such a magnificent view could only be seen on Mars. However, watching the same view every day turned out to be dull and boring. Wang Chang began to miss Koro Island, the pleasant island where the sea breeze mixed with the scent of seafood, and the pristine sky. Shaking his head, Wang Chang put away his journal and also his nostalgia. He opened the door, geared up his space suit, and jumped into the sand with the equipment box. In order to prevent the sudden arrival of a sandstorm, he already opened the anchoring device of the rover and attached himself with a safety rope behind his back. While he never witnessed it before he came, he heard that the sandstorm could reach a strength equivalent to a level 12 typhoon on Earth. He could be easily sent into the air with his build. A lake bed sedimentary phase. This is almost weathered. There should be water underneath, just don't know how much. He collapsed the holographic image and held onto the device as big as a suitcase. Wang Chang found a relatively flat position on the ground, and then fixed the device to the ground. It was not a sophisticated piece of equipment, but a practical one. There was a striker at the bottom of the device, which simulated the seismic wave by high-speed impact on the surface. According to the different propagation speed of the wave in different media, the lithology of different depths was determined, and also groundwater was determined along with its depth. He removed the tablet in front of his chest and connected it to the equipment before exporting the seismic wave. Imported, let me see. Looking down at the waveform, Wang Chang already gained an understanding of the formation. However, when he saw the positioned about 2 kilometers underground, he suddenly frowned. Is it wrong? At the position of 2 kilometers underground, the 3 red, blue and green waves were distorted and even intertwined. In his more than 10 years of experience, it was the first time he witnessed this kind of a graph. The seismic wave was backed up. Wang Chang restarted the device. After waiting for 3 minutes, he measured another set of data. However, the result this time was still the same. Future Heavy Industries was known for its durability. However, if the possibility of equipment failure was ruled out, then there was only one possible explanation. The geological information of the target area was extremely complex. More than 100 meters of the formation, there was iron, aluminum, titanium, and something he had never seen before. It was impossible for this to be formed naturally. But if wasis not formed naturally, what could it be? A thought suddenly emerged in Wang Chang's mind. His heart started pounding faster. Damn, is this a treasure? Taking a deep breath, Wang Chang restrained his excitement and didn't bother collecting another set of data. He put the tablet back onto his chest, reached out and pressed on the helmet of the spacesuit, connecting the command center of the colonial chamber through the radio on the rover. This is Prospector 01, calling the command center. I have a situation here, not a security situation. I found something interesting. If Jiang Chen didn't see it with his own eyes, if he didn't touch it with his gloves, he would have never believed that the black sphere, the size of a golf ball, would really weigh 100 kilograms. He examined it closely. The surface of the black ball exuded a faint metallic luster, but its physical properties were completely different from a metal. The smooth texture of the surface didn't resemble a metal, but a form of glass. After storing the black sphere in Celestial City's lab, Jiang Chen immediately gathered more than 20 experts from Future Group's material science lab to carry out experiments. However, unfortunately, even the most talented team was still clueless about the composition of this ball. When the team leader of the research project came up next to Jiang Chen, he shook his head in embarrassment and sighed. With our current technology, we can't even determine its elemental composition. The only thing we can confirm now is that the black sphere has high material strength and the surface is very smooth. His team carried all forms of experimental methods. But despite their effort, they couldn't even make a single dent. Even the most penetrative gamma ray couldn't pass through the sphere, which made him feel helpless. The only thing he could determine is that the black sphere posed no threat and can be in contact with skin. What do you think this might be? Jiang Chen asked. The team leader hesitated for a moment and said, I don't know. If I have to take a guess, I think there should be a gravitational generating device inside this ball that can compress more than 100 kilograms of material into the size of a golf ball. Or rather, this is the fabled strong interaction material. It is directly composed of countless hadrons and even quarks, but this would be out of realm of our imagination. As he spoke, the scientist shook his head and denied himself immediately. It was once speculated that there was a strong interaction material, but in theory it didn't make sense. At least using existing theories, it is unreasonable. But if this sphere is really composed of strong interaction material, then the civilization that created it is really light years ahead. To put it in simple terms, while one was still wondering how to cultivate, the other has already become an immortal. I propose to transfer the sphere from Celestial City to Coral Island's Material Science Lab. There is more sophisticated equipment there we can use to conduct experiments, the team leader suggested. Jiang Chen shook his head. No, let's pause for now. The way we think may have flaws. I'll think about other methods. The team leader looked confused, but he didn't insist further. For 3 days, he and his team wandered around the sphere. But they couldn't even advance one step further in their research. The boss' euphemistic speech was already saving his face. Just like this, the Coral Island researchers returned home. After the researchers left with the equipment, Jiang Chen orders dozens of soldiers from the military, locked down the lab with the black sphere, and gave out strict order. Except for himself, no one was allowed to enter the lab. Then, Jiang Chen took the black sphere and tossed it into the storage dimension. When he returned to the ground, he spoke with Aisha before heading to the apocalypse. After returning to the apocalypse, Jiang Chen immediately handed the black sphere to Lin Lin. After the integration of knowledge between the 2000 sisters, the research institute consisting of clones and digitalized humans became the most technologically advanced research institute in the NAC. Different from Fallout Shelter 027 with a focus on applied technology, the Lin Research Institute focused on theory and cutting-edge technology. Lin Lin was the perfect candidate to study the mystery of this black ball. Although she said she was not pleased with the assignment, when she saw the black sphere, she stopped her work on the portal and immediately dedicated herself to the mysterious object from the extraterrestrial civilization. Jiang Chen was used to the displeased Lin Lin. He knew that while she didn't look pleasant on the surface, she was more enthusiastic than anyone else, she was just too shy to show this side of her. He rubbed Lin Lin's head, and in her grumpy protest, he left the research institute. Over the next few days, he planned to stay in the apocalypse until the end of the month. Then he would return to the modern world to oversee the situation. Lin Lin's research speed exceeded Jiang Chen's expectations, at least much faster than he expected. At noon on the third day, Jiang Chen was sitting on the sofa and chatting with Xiaoro in the living room while waiting for Yao Yao to announce it was time for lunch. Then, a tired Lin Lin pushed open the door and strolled in before plunging down right next to him. I have the results. Like my previous conjecture, the sphere is indeed made out of strong interaction material, referred to as hadron material. Also in 3 days, the research team of Future Group did not even know how to start. However, Lin Lin already made some progress which even shocked Jiang Chen. Strong interaction material. Sun Xiaoro titled her head and looked at the two in confusion. It's hard to explain, Lin Lin said, putting her hand on her forehead, and sighed. The strong interaction force overcame the strong repulsive force generated by the electromagnetic force, and the particles in the material are bonded together by strong interaction force. In short, this small sphere is composed entirely of protons and neutrons, and naturally is not made out of the traditional element sense. So, this thing is like a giant atom? Jiang Chen had a strange expression on his face. Well, although you are not right, it is very commendable that you can understand this with your superficial physics knowledge OUCH. Before she finished, she covered her forehead, and glanced at Jiang Chen with a grieved expression. Why did you do that? I'm not wrong. Jiang Chen ignored Lin Lin's grievances. Don't interrupt. What do you think it is? A battery? Or a weapon? Or a detector? None of those. Lin Lin shook her head and grabbed her hair in distress, or all of them. The issue is that it is hadron material. It is impossible to analyze its internal structure with the existing technical means, no device can even penetrate this. Lin Lin's eyes suddenly lit up and she muttered to herself, wait, it's not impossible. Sun Xiaoro looked at the two, still confused about what they were muttering. After lunch, Lin Lin returned to the institute with Jiang Chen. Out of curiosity, Sun Xiaoro also followed the two. This small sphere may be a secret in the modern world, but it was nothing special in the apocalypse. Therefore, Jiang Chen did not hide anything from Xiaoro. He narrated the origin of the sphere through a story to her. Extraterrestrial civilization. Do they really exist? In the corridor of the institute, Sun Xiaoro slanted her head, and her soft, luscious hair draped across her shoulder. Her nose pointed upwards due to confusion, making her look more and more like her sister. Who knows? Although we haven't met it yet, but who knows? Not to mention, if it is not an extraterrestrial civilization, how can we explain the sphere made out of hadron material? Jiang Chen smiled, it doesn't look like something that can be formed in nature at all. Use the result to derive the cause. Yes. How can you explain your ability to interdimensional travel? Sun Xiaoro grinned. Jiang Chen thought about it, then shook his head. For the time being, he didn't want to think about this. Lin Lin took the two people to the elevator and arrived at the lab deep underground. Although the Lin Research Institute did not research weapons, the particle cannon was an exception. Studying how to use magnetic confinement technology to wrap larger, high-temperature particles or even antimatter, was one of the research topics Jiang Chen gave the institute. And this lab was designed to test this particle cannon. The explosion-proof and earthquake resistance of this lab was ranked among the top in the NAC. In the middle of the lab, Jiang Chen saw the black sphere. From the new graphene protective wall, it was clear that Lin already tested the particle cannon on the black sphere. She was very close to use antimatter with power equivalent to nuclear weapons as her last resort, but she still couldn't break the sphere. Jiang Chen thought that if the particle cannon did not even dent the sphere, perhaps only antimatter could damage it. Just as Jiang Chen debated about this possibility, Lin took a deep breath and whispered, "I'll leave it up to you," and then a ray of crimson light formed in her eye. Jiang Chen silently put away the electronic products on him into the storage dimension, and also took Xiao's EP away. Most of the equipment used in this laboratory were large-scale optoelectronic components. The parts on Lin's body were the jewels of pre-war technology. They were all resistant to the strong EMP effect generated when the Klein particles collapsed to the third dimension. But it was not the case for Jiang Chen's electronics. For example, the watch Yao gifted him. It could certainly resist an EMP grenade, but Lin's EMP could melt the electronic components inside it into a paste. Lin's solution was simple. Klein particles. Since it is a particle that exists in the fourth dimension, it shan't be too difficult to break through the hadron material. After all, the two are not on one dimension at all. As long as she can prove that the Klein particles can pass through the hadron material, then the next step is easy. Design a Klein particle wave detector to learn about the internal structure of the sphere. This step should not be a problem. How do you plan to treat Tingting? Sun Xiao with a wicked smile held onto Jiang Chen's arm. She gently whispered in his ear. "I heard from my sister the story between you and her in the virtual reality realm of Fallout Shelter 005. Jiang Chen selectively ignored this question. To be honest, he didn't know how to respond to Tingting's feelings. He wasn't even sure if her feelings are the same as the like experienced by humans. Inside the graphene protective wall, Lin no, Tingting, formed a red ray in her eyes. The unstable red rays were the sign that the Klein particles collapsing from the fourth dimension to the third dimension. She aimed at the center of the room, and the ray suddenly burst out and directly hit the black sphere. However, something unexpected occurred. The moment the ray collided with the black sphere, the ray was deflected and redirected into the graphene protective wall. The ray formed a large hole on the protective wall. Jiang Chen's eyes almost popped out. Although he did not expect the Klein particle beam to penetrate the sphere, it was his first time seeing something that could deflect Klein particles. The crimson dissipated from her pupils, and the energy-depleted Tingting entered hibernation. Lin stared at the big hole on the wall and paused for a moment. Then she quickly walked to the instrument on her left hand and called out the Klein particle distribution map in the room. On that image, it was obvious that a thick and bright red ray shot into the middle of the room, and then there was a 45 degrees turn. The action made sense since Lin did not expect the Klein particle beam to penetrate the black sphere. However, what shocked her was, at the position of the black sphere, not only the Klein particles that collapsed into the three-dimensional in the form of energy were deflected, even the Klein particles that have not yet decayed from the fourth dimension were also deflected. Hadron material was still a three-dimensional material after all, but it even interfered with the particles in the fourth dimension. It was like a particle in the fourth dimension was blocked by the wall in the third dimension. How could this be? Although Lin couldn't believe this, she knew it was not an experimental error. The Klein particle monitor next to her was designed by her and her sisters. In this 300 square meters lab, the monitoring of the density of the Klein particles can even be accurate to the millimeter level. Even if this instrument was compared to technology before the war, the top academicians would applaud over the accuracy of this device. Sun Xiaoro walked over to the graphene protective wall and touched the terrifying fracture. She was stunned. Unwillingly to accept the result, Lin Lin still wanted to try once more, but Tingting no longer had any energy. She had to give up. How is the situation? Although he had an idea from the expression on her face, he still asked. Sure enough, Lin Lin shook her head and grabbed her hair in frustration. She muttered in a depressed mood. Even the Klein particles can't penetrate this. I don't understand, it doesn't make sense. You mean, the hadron material is completely protected against Klein particles? It seems to be the case, maybe it's a principle we still don't understand. I don't understand. While Lin Lin was frustrated, Jiang Chen's eyes gradually lit up. This is amazing. He was worried about how he would defend against the Klein particle beam known as the electronics killer if he encounters the space colonization ship from Harmony. However, now, the solution has appeared in front of him and he only needs to figure out how to gild a layer of the hadron material on the battleship. Chapter 1097 Martian. Under Jiang Chen's eager gaze, Lin Lin shivered, and her tone quieted down. What do you want? Is there any way to replicate this kind of hadron material? Jiang Chen asked eagerly. Lin Lin thought, and then she shook her head furiously. It's very difficult, almost impossible. Is it more difficult than antimatter? Jiang Chen frowned. Antimatter has a theoretical basis since the last century. The theory has matured since the middle of the century and it's even possible to start large-scale preparation. It is because of the lack of breakthrough in magnetic confinement technology and the restrictions from the Science Ethics Committee that prevented the breakthrough of the last critical step. Lin Lin shook her head with a bitter smile. But before the war, the so-called hadron material was still something that only existed in science fiction, let alone the theoretical foundation. We don't understand anything about it. Not possible. Jiang Chen asked reluctantly. It's not that it is impossible. Lin Lin touched her chin and looked at the black sphere in the middle of the lab. I can give it a try, but I can't guarantee I'll succeed. Why are you suddenly interested in this? Even if we can barely make some hadron material, without large-scale production, it won't be useful. Can't achieve large-scale production. Jiang Chen sighed. We can't even understand its production conditions. This time Lin Lin was confused. Then, she looked at Jiang Chen with skepticism. Do you want to use hadron material to build a warship? That's not a good idea. When she heard Jiang Chen's naive question, Lin Lin sighed. Think about it carefully. How did the pilot you sent enter the UFO and take the sphere out of it? Jiang Chen's eyebrows furrowed, recalling the pilot named Lu Qingpeng and what he described. There was a fracture on the outer shell of the UFO that resembled the collision of a meteorite. He is from, halfway through the sentence, Jiang Chen already realized as his expression turned awkward. Right, since the meteorite cracked the outer shell of the UFO, then without a doubt the UFO was definitely not made out of hadron material. Even the higher civilization that have mastered the hadron material for many years couldn't achieve mass production of such material. How could Earth that didn't even understand the theory achieve the impossible? As soon as he heard that there was no way for mass production, Jiang Chen's interest immediately decreased. He sighed. Do your best. Your research direction should still be on antimatter and portals. Although very reluctant, Jiang Chen rationally knew that if this hadron material took too much of NAC's energy, it would not be worth it. As for the black sphere, he planned to leave it here. He thought that even if he brought it back to the modern world, the scientists would be clueless about what to do and ultimately eat dust in the lab. Perhaps Lin Lin and her sisters could come up with a theory with leaving it here. You don't have to be so pessimistic. Perhaps there are more secrets in this black sphere compared to the hadron material. After all, this is a relic of higher civilization. A civilization much more advanced than Harmony. An item made with hadron material shouldn't just be an ornament, with a rare comforting tone, Lin comforted Jiang Chen. Then she took a tablet and clicked on it. Soon, the platform in which the black sphere was placed on slowly sank and was taken into the lab warehouse. Stop looking, let's go. She patted Jiang Chen's back and then walked to the elevator. 70 kilometers east of the Mars colony, a rover was parked on this endless sand dune. The weather was surprisingly nice, and the surface temperature was also above zero. In a heavy spacesuit, Wang Chang took the captain and the engineer to Mine 071, the place where he found something intriguing last time. In front of the caption, Wang Chang once again measured the 3 sets of waveforms to prove his discovery. Wang Chang said seriously as he pointed at the image on the tablet. The depth of about 5 kilometers, the thickness of about 100 meters of the formation, I dare to conclude that there must be something buried inside. Iron ore. Taking a glance at the waveforms on the tablet, Askim frowned. As the colony's engineer, his responsibility involved equipment maintenance and colony expansion. It is fair to say he knew nothing about mining. The few staggering waveforms didn't look odd to him. However, Hong Ziwei standing next to him realized the unusual nature. As the captain of the colonial ship and the interim executive of the colony, it is fair to say he is the most knowledgeable person in the entire colony. Because of work needs, he understood a little bit of all aspects. Even if he is not a master of everything, he must at least understand. He is a layman, but he learned how to interpret seismic data. When he saw the waveforms that were distorted by incredible magnitude, his expression changed drastically. It can't be an iron ore. It can't be any rock formation or deposit. Wang Chang shook his head and explained to Askim. Askim started to grin. Not any deposit. What could it be? An alien grave? Wang Chang closed his mouth and did not speak. Captain Hong Ziwei spoke up. Maybe, it's really the aliens' mausoleum. Askim looked at the captain as if he saw a ghost. His expression looked extremely strange. Alien? Hong, are you sure you are not kidding? When these colonists set off, the X-2 bacterial incident had not happened yet, and the Outer Space Security Summit did not even exist. Aliens were still strange or whimsical to them. Of course, if Mars could access the internet, they perhaps won't be surprised by the word alien. Now, countries were all having a difficult time dealing with the concept of extraterrestrial civilization. The governments were busy calming public opinion and discussing countermeasures as they also have not received any news from Mars. Joking. Maybe it is not a mausoleum, but the city of the aliens. Hong Ziwei glanced at him and joked. Have you seen Starship Troopers? Maybe those bugs live underneath us and are going to crawl out to bite us now. 2-inch Fu *K. Don't scare me. Askim shivered and looked underneath his feet. How do you feel about drilling a hole? Can you do it? Wang Chang asked Askim. Aha, you must be asking if it is possible to make a hole 5 kilometers deep? I have to tell you regretfully that there is no such equipment in the colony. Even if there is, don't even think about it. Askim shook his head rapidly, using a warning tone. Listen, I don't want to die with you. Unless the command center sends soldiers to ensure our safety, don't expect me to do this stupid thing for you. 1 inch. You shouldn't have scared him. Wang Chang looked at Hong Ziwei and forced a smile. Who knew he would take it seriously? The captain made a helpless expression. Not to mention what he said is justified. There are no decent weapons in the colony. If the danger is below, we can't even resist. Originally Hong Ziwei was only joking, but this time he has began to think about his own statement. In case the creatures are hiding under the ground, no one can guarantee that there is no such possibility. Mars is more like the Earth than Earth 4 billion years ago. When Columbus first set foot on the American continent, he didn't think there were people on the continent until they met the indigenous people with feathers on their heads. After all, 20 lives are in his hands. What do we do now? Wang Chang looked at the captain and asked, "Just leave it here. Let's go back to the colonial chamber. I will pass the message to the command center and request drilling equipment on the next colonization ship, and then ask if we can request a few soldiers." K, I scared myself too. Alien. Extraterrestrial civilization. These two terms were quite strange to most people a month ago. However, just in a month's time, these two terms had created fear by most people. More than a week ago, rumors about extraterrestrial civilization swept across the entire internet, and debate was ignited with the intentionally stirring of celestial trade and future group. The T virus and the X2 bacteria had already plagued the nerves of modern people. Under the current circumstance, with news of extraterrestrial civilization spreading prolifically, this immediately caused shock around the world. Interestingly, it was obvious to those who were aware that the messages were disclosed in an ordered fashion. At the beginning, only informed people revealed that the Outer Space Security Summit was a defensive nature summit against extraterrestrial civilizations. Then, a country's official who asked not to be named stated that the spacecraft of extraterrestrial civilization is on the way to Earth and has crossed the distance of several light years. The government was discussing the use of 5% of GDP for the construction of a space colonization ship. The signs of escapism ignited panic in those who were concerned. Peasants were not stupid. No matter how big the colonization ship was, they certainly would not have a chance to obtain a ticket. Either everyone would live together, or we would go down together. Such arguments seemed to be contrary to universal values, but most people living at the bottom were well aware that this was their only hope of living. Maybe they wouldn't see the day, but they must consider the future of their offspring. There were protests at unprecedented scale worldwide. The defiance against class was at a level unseen before. Even Xi'an faced the same issue. Take the UA as an example. After the disclosure of extraterrestrial civilization, the capital was busy extinguishing the fire, and the Wall Street tycoons completely tore off the disguise on their faces. The Morgan Foundation and the Rockefeller Consortium jointly established a number of non-public funds named Noah's Ark and Columbus and set a minimum buy-in amount of $10 million. The fund would be used to build a space colonization ship capable of leaving the solar system. Each share of the fund corresponded to a ticket, and each 10 share corresponds to a VIP ticket. However, there was no impenetrable wall in this world. Once the fund was disclosed, it caused an uproar. A congressman condemned the fund in the Congress and proposed legislation to ban the existence of such a fund, but the next day he was kicked out of his party. On the third day, he turned into a hero for the civilians, as he stood on the streets to protest, and surrounded the Capitol. Then on the fifth day, the brave member was found to have suicided in his home. On the sixth day, his portrait appeared in the parade that occupied Wall Street. The demonstrators clashed with the anti-riot police, the explosion-proof shield and tear gas made the scene extremely chaotic. In addition to the controversial Noah's Ark Fund, Silicon Valley also created a number of terrestrial planetary exploration companies that seek investor funding by searching for terrestrial planets in hundreds of millions of galaxies and developing colonization programs. In addition to the dispute between escapism and anti-escapism, many strange rhetorics were also born. Such as capitulation. Just as everyone was frightened by the space colonization ship of the extraterrestrial civilization, Greenpeace made a statement. This organization, which flaunts love and peace, declared that extraterrestrial civilization may be coming for peaceful purposes, and that their purpose of aggression is only arrogance and prejudice of humans. They also claimed that rashly taking military action would only provoke a war between two civilizations and warn some people not to make the wrong choice. The organization also used its global influence and organized two large-scale demonstrations in Xi'an. Both demonstrations were suppressed by police drones. They were not convinced as they turned their attention to the space elevator and created the movement to occupy the space elevator. Soon, they paid the price for their stupidity. Celestial trade was not as nice as the Xi'an government. The Special Operations Brigade stationed at the base station directly captured all the demonstrators, and the courts completed the trial at lightning speed. They were not given an opportunity to appeal and tossed into prison immediately. The thunderous reaction of celestial trade finally cooled some people's irrational brains down and learned who was the true owner of the country. However, the intensive measures are not without side effects. In the past 2 weeks, the situation in Xi'an was unsettled, and it even forced the presidential palace to issue documents and tighten the issuance of tourist visas. Of course, for the colonists on Mars, these things that happened on Earth have nothing to do with them. Perhaps when they call their loved ones, they could reveal snippets of the demonstration, but now, alien was still a strange term to them. Or, a disturbing term. After returning to the colony, in just one day, Askim's big mouth immediately let everyone know about the abnormality discovered at Mine 071. Now the entire colony knew that there may be buried Martians under their feet, and the atmosphere in the colonial chamber suddenly became strange. Just as Hong Zue, the captain of the colony, had a headache about how to write this report, the Xi'an president Zhang Yaping had already ended his visit to Hua and departed for Russia. Negotiations in Hua were not smooth sailing, but driven by common threats and visible benefits, the two sides reached agreement on the core issues and established the basic framework for the Outer Space Defense Alliance. Russian President Putin personally greeted him at the Moscow International Airport. With the escort of the Russian Security Service, the convoy of the two presidents headed to Kremlin. Sitting across from Putin, Zhang Yaping watched the streets of Moscow, and his eyes swept over an armored vehicle. Did something happen recently? A lot of things have happened. It depends on what you mean, Putin smiled and replied in English. Things that need to be fixed by armored vehicles? Zhang Yaping asked in a nonchalant tone. Putin grinned and then looked expressionless out the window. Zhang Yaping followed his line of sight. It was a temporary post built on the street. The soldiers on duty were looking at the convoy and saluting. Just 3 days ago, some people tried to persuade me to leave a path for the Slavs. Zhang Yaping raised an eyebrow. Before he came, he did some homework and learned about the financial oligarchy and ruthless politicians in Russia. It was also his biggest concern. If the Russian elites preferred escapism, then the negotiation was destined to fail. Oh. How did you answer? Until the soldier disappeared from his field of vision, Putin looked to Zhang Yaping and answered without much emotion. I told them whether it was Napoleon, Hitler, or aliens. The Kremlin is in Moscow, and the Slavs won't go anywhere. In the past, now, and in the future too. It's already July. Yes. Jiang Chen held on to Yao Yao's little hand as they strolled around the streets of the 6th Street. The bustling market gave him a sense of pride and accomplishment. Resources were becoming plentiful, people no longer looked impoverished, and the clothes on them were no longer made out of mutant fur or rags. Penniless people also no longer have to sell themselves as slaves. NAC's subsistence allowance didn't allow these people to live a comfortable life, but they could feed themselves. The neatly built concrete houses once again stood on top of the ruins, replacing the shacks that used to be made out of iron and wooden supports. The landscape that was originally only seen in the inner circle now was common in the outer circle, benefiting every survivor in the 6th Street. Order in the market no longer needed to be maintained by hanging human heads and bodies treated with formalin. The word law for the first time regained its meaning on this soil. If someone dared to destroy the order, NAC's fierce garrisons would be the first to let them know their own stupidity. Almost every month, Jiang Chen took a trip with his guards to the NAC area, sometimes in the 6th Street, sometimes in Jia City, Hang City, or Hongqing. Except for Izhou Island, due to the distance, he visited all the settlements with more than 10,000 people. The 6th Street was undoubtedly the most prosperous among all settlements. The tours served the purpose of observing the people's living conditions but were mostly used to strengthen his own rule while maintaining his presence among the survivors. If he didn't appear enough, people wouldn't remember what he looked like. The guards in kinetic skeletons surrounded him while the power armors guarded them further away. They left enough space for Jiang Chen and Yao Yao while protecting them in the middle. No matter where they went, the sight of soldiers, traders, and civilians was always in awe and worship. Some people even stopped and took off their hats to pay tribute. As the general of the NAC, he was not only the ruler here but also the spiritual leader of the survivors. Other than the people who admired him, many women worshipped him as a hero and all looked at him keenly, directly revealing their desire. Because of their excellent genes, other than those who were too skinny, most of them were stunning. As for the little girl he was holding, they selectively ignored her. It was not uncommon for polygamy to exist on the wasteland. It was the privilege of the strong and the obligation of the strong to enjoy more spouses. Even the civilized people, who only awakened not long after they accepted the reality that the civilization they've known has disappeared, most remained silent about natural selection, and some even were proactive in seeking stronger spouses. In order to live a life where they didn't have to survive on nutrient supply, those who passed through the struggling period chose to approach powerful men and ignore their many spouses. The sight of those women made Yao Yao very uncomfortable. The instinctive sense of danger made the little lowly fearful, so she tightened her grip on Jiang Chen's arm. Before coming out, Sister Sun Jiao cautioned her to look after brother Jiang Chen, or else there may be more and more sisters at home. She knows exactly what these women want through their gazes, but she couldn't do anything about them. Yao Yao pouted with some frustration as she thought about her own body. Only if my chest is a little bigger. Yao Yao sighed. Although brother Jiang Chen occasionally kissed her and occasionally did some weird things, all the moves stopped before the final base. She was no longer a child. Even with the inhibitors stunting her growth, she was already 20 years old. However, brother Jiang Chen always viewed her as a child. However, she could do the stuff that sister Sun Jiao and Xiaoro do. If you don't try it, how do you know it's not good? Do you not like summer? Looking at the lowly's puffed mouth, Jiang Chen misunderstood her mind and rubbed her fluffy hair. This good weather is hard to come by. I like it, but once summer is over, brother Jiang Chen will rarely come back. She moved closer to Jiang Chen and used her little hand to gently grab his sleeve as she muttered in a quiet voice. How come? Yao Yao's hot pot is so delicious, I am looking forward to the winter. Holding on to Yao Yao's small hand again, Jiang Chen smiled. It would be great if they could fix the Holy Shield system before winter arrives. The apocalypse already entered the small ice age. For the next while, the weather would only get colder and colder. Wanhai City is located in the south and the effects of the storm would be bearable. Jiang Chen heard that at the beginning of the year, in the area north of Shangjing, the entire settlement was frozen into a dead city, and people who could survive turned into cannibals. How could those deeper in the north survive? It was not a problem that can be solved with 1 or 2 bottles of vodka. No one would be spared from this global disaster. Taking Yao Yao's small hand, Jiang Chen took his guards to tour a few prosperous areas in the outer circle and finally ended this month's routine inspection. Yao Yao was sent on the returning helicopter. Jiang Chen did not go back together with her. Instead, he went to the inner circle to see Chu Nan, who had just finished a scheduled meeting. Just half a month ago, when Jiang Chen came back last time, he hired a battleship from the Beluga observation station and transported a 50-person investigation unit across the Pacific Ocean to the North American continent. He had been curious for a long time. Asia was basically in shambles, so what would North America look like? Although both CCCP and PAC were unable to land in North America, nuclear weapons certainly made frequent visits. Similarly, Jiang Chen was also curious about Africa. While the whole world was showered by nuclear bombs, Africa surprisingly didn't get hit due to its poor economic status. They only got secondhand smoke from the monsoon crossing and fought themselves to death. However, he couldn't expand to Africa yet due to the distance. It was rumored that monstrous sea beasts over hundreds of meters long roamed in the Indian Ocean. It would be difficult to get to the continent. While many epic mutants dwelled in the Pacific Ocean, the risk was much lower taking the Bering Strait. After seeing Chu Nan, Jiang Chen got straight to the point. Is there any news from North America? According to your request, our people have established an outpost on the west coast. Although Chu Nan did not understand why the general was interested in North America, he sent a reconnaissance unit. A simple post was built on the ruins of the west coast, and a radio communication base station was set up to contact the 6th Street. Jiang Chen smiled and nodded with satisfaction. Oh. Then tell me about it. What is it like there? The West Coast has formed a separate force, mainly concentrated in Los Angeles and San Francisco. The battleship of the Beluga inspection station anchored on the shores of Los Angeles has sent boats to carry our people onto the continent. After they arrived, our people set up a post on the West Coast and sent soldiers to explore Los Angeles. On the outskirts of Los Angeles, we encountered a kind of mutant similar to the mutant lizards we see here. They live in groups and act aggressively, but fortunately, our people first discovered them. After taking care of those lizards, our people successfully arrived in Los Angeles. The entirety of Los Angeles is in ruins. It's similar to the situation in Shanghai, but the population there is much smaller. Based on what the local people said, there are large and small survivors settlements on the West Coast, including the National Guards, the militia, Minutemen, the cannibal tribe, Bloodhounds, and the mutated humans tribe, Destruction. They have a developed animal husbandry industry. Our people have found large-scale double-headed cows on the edge of the desert in California. Their double-headed cows are larger in size because of the consumption of a fern that reduces radiation. The radiation of these cattle is low, and the meat quality is relatively delicious. The survivors mainly use crystals and mutant skins as the currency for trade. Also, there is something else that's interesting. Chu Nan took out something from his pocket and gently dropped it on the table. We found this from the Beluga station and brought it back. This is a bottle cap. Jiang Chen was confused as he examined the bottle cap that was spinning on the table. More precisely, it's a limited edition bottle cap created by the Coca-Cola Company after 2168. It is equipped with Coca-Cola's nickel-plated anti-counterfeit logo. Each bottle of Coke has a specific number stored in the database of the Coke plant in California. Chu Nan grinned. The factory is now controlled by the California National Guard as their money printing machine. Using bottle caps as currency. Jiang Chen revealed a strange expression. Free, that's right. This is hard to forge. Every factory bottle cap is automatically recorded into the database. The entire West Coast and even some inland states are using this as currency. However, this bottle cap seems to experience high inflation. A good quality rifle requires 10,000 caps, an adult double-headed cow is worth 100,000 caps. A National Guard power armor requires an astronomical figure, close to 10 million I think. Where did they get so much nickel? Jiang Chen asked. Although nickel was not a rare earth material, it was more scarce than rare earth materials on the wasteland, let alone North America, which was already scarce of nickel. It was due to the already high demand for nickel. From power armor to tanks, every product depended on this particular metal. The amount recycled from wastes was not enough, and Jiang Chen relied on the modern world to solve NAC's nickel crisis. In order to smuggle a bit of nickel from the NAC, the Northern Alliance District tried all different kinds of means, but the survivors on the West Coast actually used nickel to produce bottle caps. They certainly don't have that much nickel. Chu Nan shrugged, then laughed. So when our people proposed a trade with the California National Guard, the first thing they asked about was, do you have nickel? Jiang Chen already understood. For the survivors on the West Coast, nickel served the same purpose as gold. Nickel standard instead of gold standard. Or the security code standard. In addition, Jiang Chen gained some other information from Chu Nan. For example, since the survivors used nickel to cast coins, presumably their industrial level shouldn't be high. At most, they would be comparable to the 6th Street 4 years ago, building rifles to power armors by hand. Chu Nan looked at Jiang Chen and already guessed what his boss was thinking, so he asked, "What is your plan?" He was worried about the boss suddenly making a rash decision and sending thousands of soldiers to California to liberate North America. Even though he believed that NAC's force could easily dominate the rest of the world, it served no purpose. Now NAC's sphere of influence was between Wanghai and the Wu City region. They could easily expand to the southern provinces rich in resources. It served as an advantage to control the west coast all the way across to the Pacific Ocean. Jiang Chen certainly understood the drawbacks. The west coast post is to be maintained at its current size. It will likely alarm the local forces if we expand. Don't let our people just be idle. Get them to investigate what specialty products are worth bringing back, and then research what the local survivors lack in addition to metal resources. In 3 days, I need you to provide me with all this information in a report. Chu Nan smiled confidently. No problem, maybe it won't even take 3 days. Right, there is still one more thing I need your input in. Please go ahead, Chu Nan said respectfully. I'm going to build a navy. What do you think? Although he said it was an issue he wanted to discuss, his tone revealed his certainty. He has thought about forming a NAC navy since a long time ago. It used to be unnecessary, but with the expansion of the NAC, its own market was far from enough to feed the booming industry. NAC's expansion must be built on trade routes, and the role of the ocean played a bigger and bigger role. However, the ocean was controlled by the Beluga Observation Station. Previously hiring Beluga Station to escort NAC was due to NAC's lack of energy to expand to the ocean, while also being worried that these guys with guns and rifles will end up becoming pirates. As for the sonar to repel away small marine mutants, Camp 027 already created a prototype, ready to be put into action at a moment's notice. Chu Nan was thrilled to hear the news. General is wise. No need to flatter me, I asked you for your opinion. Jiang Chen smiled. NAC should have had its own navy long ago. If you have to ask me, this is my only opinion. Chu Nan laughed and slapped his thigh, then after recollecting himself, he looked at Jiang Chen with seriousness. I share the same opinion as you. NAC's ocean must be maintained by NAC itself. The only trouble now is what will the Beluga Station think of this? Jiang Chen frowned when he heard the concern. The opinion of the Beluga Inspection Station was indeed a problem. Now the oceans in the entire Pan-Asia region were almost monopolized in their hands. Any fleet that wished to conduct offshore trade must sign a protection agreement with them. If NAC started to develop a navy, it would indeed affect their interest. Unless he could find a suitable entry point. Carefully weighing the pros and cons, Jiang Chen's sight unconsciously landed on the Pan-Asia map on the wall. When his eyes moved to the sea near Wanghai, a brilliant idea suddenly came to his mind. A suitable reason, or an excuse. Even if the Beluga Station was displeased, he would have the perfect excuse. On July 1st, Luding Town requested assistance from NAC on the grounds that the aircraft carrier was in disrepair. As an ally with a strong relationship, NAC was obliged to help and sent an engineering team to carry out a comprehensive inspection of the Bohai aircraft carrier. The NAC engineering team concluded that the aircraft carrier, due to a lack of maintenance, was in critical condition. Only a full replacement of the aging parts could save the city on the aircraft carrier. It made sense what happened next. NAC built a shipyard at the port in front of Luding Town to produce parts for replacement. NAC also sent technicians on the aircraft carrier in the name of site maintenance. But in fact, only they knew what they were actually doing it. NAC's move made the Beluga Station feel nervous, but it all made sense. Wu Yu, stationed at the 6th Street, went to see Jiang Chen several times to subtly learn his perspective and to understand what NAC was planning. However, Jiang Chen would never reveal his true intention to him. As for the protagonist of this fiasco, was Luding Town pleased? The senior officials of Luding welcomed NAC with open arms. Not only did NAC help them replace parts, they also renovated the hull for free. NAC even promised them over 100,000 credit points. Where could they find a better deal? Would the NAC Navy pose a threat to Luding Town? No one thought from that perspective. When the strength of the two sides was too drastically different, the idea of a threat was no longer within consideration. Since NAC eradicated the mutants of Wanghai in a dominating manner, Luding Town never mentioned the idea of splitting Wanghai with NAC once more. Later, Luding Town was fully integrated into NAC's credit point monetary system, and the economy became more and more dependent on the 6th Street. The senior officials of Luding Town even began purchasing assets in the 6th Street, and even regarded themselves as part of the NAC. Just like this, NAC built a shipyard on the edge of Wanghai and trained the ship engineers in the name of repairing the aircraft carrier. On the other hand, a message came back from the outpost on the west coast. It included a list of California specialty and resource deficiencies. Inheriting the scientific research results of the pre-war Silicon Valley, the electronics industry there was extremely developed. The drones and robotics level were far above Wu City, mostly attributable to the leadership position of Silicon Valley's electronic chip production technology. In addition, North American power armor was vastly adopted. Even the raiders could build power armors using scraps. For pre-war militia organizations like the National Guard, almost 1 out of every 4 soldiers owned a Militia 02 power armor. Today, almost everyone owned a power armor. Electronic chips, robotic accessories, and even power armors were all promising goods to be traded. With almost no hesitation, Jiang Chen listed these 3 products as the key imports for this trade route across the ocean. Other than advanced electronics industry. Due to the development of animal husbandry, California's canned meat was even sold by dealers to South America. And some of the radiation-resistant crops that could only grow on specific soils made California a granary of North America. Under such circumstances, it was obviously meaningless to export food to California. Even if NAC's pre-war food was more delicious, the advantage would not be too substantial. After all, quantity mattered more than quality on the wasteland. As long as it was not the double-headed beef raised in the 6th Street 5 years ago that tasted like wax, people were already happy being able to eat meat. This proved that a food trade had no future in North America. However, the development of animal husbandry meant that they were quite lacking in spices and condiments. For example, the mutated peppers and anise produced by Hongcheng, the various sauces processed in the 6th Street, and the mud crab roe produced in Ijo Island should have a good market on the west coast. In addition to spices and condiments, arms would be another option. The ammunitions produced by the 6th Street were definitely more durable than the rifles hand-built by the survivors. Of course, the kinetic skeletons and the T3 and T4 power armors would not be exported, even if there were hundreds of thousands of miles between California and Wanghai. In addition, when trading with the locals, remember to pay attention to items related to NASA. If they find the wreckage of advanced spacecraft or satellite, ship it back with other trade goods. After discussing trade items with Chu Nan, Jiang Chen added one more point. Although the NASA of the modern world was completely outclassed by celestial trade, the NASA on this timeline remained a powerful organization. No problem. It was no longer a secret among NAC officials that their boss loved to collect spacecrafts. Chu Nan simply agreed. Jiang Chen stretched out and sunk into his chair after the call ended. After the NAC went on the right track, very few things required him to personally overlook. To the point where he didn't remember the last time he sat in the general office to take care of affairs. Sun Jiao opened the door and walked in with coffee. When she saw Jiang Chen relaxed in the chair, she smiled gently. With quiet steps, she walked behind him and began to massage him. Tired? Let me help you. Such a gentle action from Sun Jiao made Jiang Chen unable to comprehend. "Does it feel nice?" Sun Jiao asked. In order to confirm that he wasn't hallucinating, Jiang Chen looked up and met a pair of gentle and watery pupils. "Did you eat something strange this morning?" It hurts. Be gentle." The smile on her face did not change, but the murderousness in her eyes was oozing out as her fingers sunk into his shoulders. "Sure enough, this is the Sun Jiao that I know of." Jiang Chen thought with a painful grin. If it was Xiaoro or Yao Yao, he would have turned around and took them down. But at the moment it was Sun Jiao with impeccable strength. But quickly, the pressure on his shoulders disappeared. Softness embraced the back of his head, and Sun Jiao wrapped her arms around him, gently placing her chin on his shoulder. She wanted to say many things, but in the end, there was only one word that came out. "Fool." Jiang Chen smiled and reached out to hold her hand. A moment of silence lingered between the duo, then Sun Jiao gently bit her lower lip before whispering. "You are going back tomorrow?" "Aha, I will always miss you." Jiang Chen smiled. "Dummy, brother-in-law." Before he could finish, he was interrupted by a crisp voice outside the door. Sun Jiao quickly jumped away and stood next to Jiang Chen. The office door was pushed open and Sun Xiaoro hopped in. However, when she took her first step into the office, her foot stopped midair and looked suspiciously at the two people in the office. When she saw the red glow and nervous expression on her sister's face, she quickly read the atmosphere in the air, and a naughty smile appeared. "Ah, sorry to bother you guys, please continue." "Wait, this is not what you think." Sun Jiao was blushing and rushed to explain. Xiaoro gave no chance for her sister to explain. She spat out her tongue and quickly escaped. Looking at the door, Sun Jiao, wearing a red hue, stomped her feet in anger before rushing out the door. Jiang Chen shook his head. Looking at the cup of coffee on the table, his heartbeat returned to normal, and ripples began to form again in his calm state. If Xiaoro didn't interrupt them, then he and Sun Jiao probably would have started in the office. When they are together, it seemed like there was always no self-control. Shaking his head and throwing such thoughts out of his mind, Jiang Chen picked up the documents that he put aside on the table. Zhang Yaping's diplomatic visit had ended. Without any surprise, he should be on the plane back to Xian. From tomorrow on, it was time to overlook the overall situation. Before that, he must finish the work at hand. On July 3, the two-day UN General Assembly ended. Because of a lack of cooperation from celestial trade, this meeting didn't make as much progress as most people expected. On one hand, it was because the United Nations had no right to directly interfere in the internal affairs of member states. On the other hand, it was because the representatives from Xian had no power to make decisions at all. For example, Canada proposed that celestial trade should sell its space elevator to the United Nations at a premium of 20%. Ultimately, it would be jointly funded by all countries and the United Nations would lead the defense of extraterrestrial civilization. Even though this proposal received a high number of votes, it wasn't well received by Xian. In contrast, the negotiations between Xian and Hua, Frankfurt and Russia made great progress. With Zhang Yaping's continuous efforts, the leaders of the four countries reached an agreement on the specifics. At the end of the UN General Assembly, all four countries held press conferences at the same time and announced the formation of the Earth Defense Alliance in Koro City, Shangjing, Moscow, and Br. When night embraced the Revolution Square in Koro City, the lights illuminated and dispersed the darkness. In front of the reporters, Jiang Chen solemnly gave the opening remarks of this defining ceremony. In this darkest hour, people's eyes looked over the fully armed soldiers and quietly observed the center of the square. No one made a sound. The protests and demonstrations swept the world in the past few days made everyone feel exhausted and confused. From the moment they learned about the existence of the extraterrestrial civilization, panic and fear were bred in everyone's hearts and grew uncontrollably. There's already enough evidence to prove that the tragedies in City K, Yodo, Somalia, and Finland were caused by the extraterrestrial civilization. They used lies to confuse our people. They used a conspiracy to split our people. A powerful voice echoed in the square, blowing away the fear in people's hearts. In this square once filled with the blood of revolutionists, a monument stood tall in the center, people were revitalized, and their blood began to boil. Their behavior has already constituted aggression. Jiang Chen paused as he looked around the crowd, then he said slowly, one word at a time, an aggression against all of mankind. The option of dialogue hasn't existed from the beginning. All diplomatic means don't have meaning, traditional borders are meaningless. What we can do is use blood to defend our homeland. No country can stay out of this war. So, we choose to stand up. In this solemn and sacred moment, on behalf of XIN and the colonies of celestial trade, I declare to XIN, to our allies, and the world that the Earth Defense Alliance is formally established. Thunderous applause and cheers resounded through the square, and people waved the small national flag in their hands. In their pupils full of life, there wasn't a hint of fear. For most people, they were fearful not because of the unseen extraterrestrial civilization but because of the chaos before the darkness. If the whole world was united, Earth civilization would have a fighting chance. Although still young and weak, the establishment of the Earth Defense Alliance brought hope. Amidst the deafening cheers, Jiang Chen read out the list of member states of the Earth Defense Alliance. According to the Koro City Agreement signed the previous day, the major members of the Earth Defense Alliance were XIN, Hua, Russia, and Frankfurt. The secondary members included a total of 21 Asian countries including Pakistan, Moro, Malay and so on. Based on the consensus, the major member states would contribute 5 to 7% of GDP according to their territorial size and population size, and the secondary member states would contribute 3 to 4% of GDP. All contributions would fund the development of the aerospace industry. Of course, obligation wasn't without reward. Although they had joined the Earth Defense Alliance to protect themselves, celestial trade would also treat its allies right. In the Koro City Agreement, celestial trade promised to member states that its space resources would be tilted toward member states. In addition, the agreement also stipulated that the Earth Defense Alliance would impose a 50% defense tax on all non-member states in outer space resources development. The money would be collected by celestial trade and used to establish an Earth Defense Fund. The purpose of the fund was to establish extraterrestrial fortifications and build a fleet and other defensive measures. Since this was for the common interests of all people, everyone had to contribute somehow. If they weren't going to put in the effort, then it was fair to pay some money. When this measure was released, it suddenly caused an earthquake, especially in the financial world. The aerospace companies listed on Nasdaq plunged. The prospects of aerospace companies weren't the only things that took a heavy blow. With light and heavy industrial raw materials increasingly dependent on outer space resources, pessimism began to spread from aerospace companies to manufacturing industries. What was the concept of the 50% defense tax? Taking iron ores as an example, as of July 1, 2019, thanks to the increase in the capacity of the space elevator, the industry standard ore was quoted a price of 58 new XIN dollars per ton. Before the introduction of the defense tax, the UA could import iron ore from XIN at a price of 45 new XIN dollars per ton, but after the introduction of the defense tax, their cost skyrocketed to 67.5 new XIN dollars. What's more, the price of 67.5 new XIN dollars was still lower than the production cost of $76 per ton quoted by the former mining giant, Vale. In other words, no countries would be able to find a substitute at the same price. It was impossible to underestimate the difference of 22.5 new XIN dollars. Steel was the foundation of industry, and fluctuations in commodity prices would be reflected in the cost of manufacturing. If the global price experienced volatility, the effects might be invisible because of the exchange rate. But if this price volatility was confined to a certain part of the country, then the impact couldn't be underestimated. The same unit of industrial manufactured goods would be 22.5x in new dollars more expensive if produced elsewhere. Not only iron ore but all metal minerals from iron ore to rare earth metals were impacted. Non-Earth Defense Alliance members would be forced to accept this unequal treaty. Unless they wanted to stop using the space elevator, they had to accept the 50% tax. It was foreseeable that with gradual expansion in space resource development in the future, the defense tax would be an unavoidable burden on non-member states. In the long run, the market competitiveness of the Earth Defense Alliance members would only grow. As a result, the foreign exchange in the global economy would exhibit a trend where the XIN new dollars would strengthen against other currencies. For Wall Street, no news could be worse than this new reality. At the New York Stock Exchange, there was another exclamation in the lobby. The Seattle Trailblazers that carried countless optimism by investors fell below the issuance price at opening. The company's primary business focused on the exploration of extraterrestrial planets, as well as the search for a habitable planet. Due to major breakthroughs in space telescope technology, many investors viewed them as the Columbus of the new century. Not long ago, the Noah's Ark Fund invested $200 million in this company, and on the date of its initial public offering, this bizarre incident happened. Although it wasn't rare for stocks to fall below the issuance price on the first day, it was rare for the stock price to be slashed in half, especially for a company that carried such a positive forward guidance. What made this situation even more odd was that it was the second Silicon Valley aerospace company to suffer a hard landing on the date of initial public offering in 3 days. God, you can't do this to me. I bet everything on it. A man in a suit was holding his head in pain, he was on his knees while his eyes were bloodshot. No one sympathized with him. Most of the people there felt the same despair. The entire Nasdaq sector plunged, as if all the companies related to the aerospace industry overnight no longer possessed any value. Countless investors' mood plummeted along with the downward trend line. Compared with those who used their own money to invest, many professional managers who worked for investment banks and funds or even prominent figures stood there. Their expressions were more or less somber. They knew very well that a failed investment could mean the end of their professional career, which meant their luxury homes might be taken by banks and they might not even afford to pay back their credit card balances. As the capitalists' hounds, once they lost their sense of money, they were useless. Not just Nasdaq. The Dow Jones Index, known as the economic barometer, was also brewing a storm. Many people began to decrease their holdings. In a zero-sum game, once the sell-off began, it was impossible to close the floodgate. On the same street, not far from the New York Stock Exchange in the Morgan Stanley building, Daniel Morgan was reading the newspaper in his hands with a gloomy expression. Without any warning, he suddenly scrunched up the newspaper and threw it into the corner of the office. He screamed, enraged. 50% defense tax. Shameless robbers, this is a highway robbery. When Celestial Trade brought together Hua, Russia, and Frank Berg to form the Earth Defense Alliance, he wasn't concerned. After all, without the participation of the world's largest economy, what was the use of an alliance? If the Earth Defense Alliance could really stand on the first line of defense selflessly, he was more than welcome. With the economic strength of the 4 major powers and more than 20 small countries, it would be impossible to burden the defense as they must squander money on fortifications and battleships without any return. By that time, Wall Street with a war chest of capital could become the savior again and take the alliance's fruits of labor as their own. And the introduction of the defense tax put Morgan in a hot seat. Since the collapse of the Rothschild Consortium, global mining giants such as Vale and BHP were on the brink of bankruptcy due to cash flow issues. Future Mining almost swept and took control of 1/3 of the world's commodity market, and they stole the market share previously that belonged to Vale and BHP Group through cheap and high-quality ore. Especially rare earth metals produced from the moon, which overtook Hua's market share and made XIN the world's largest exporter of rare earth metals. Without any exaggeration, once the 50% defense tax was introduced, the global commodity market would suffer damage no less than a magnitude 7 earthquake. Of course, that was for the non-members. It wasn't just Daniel Morgan who was furious, the capital's reaction was similar. Hill's economic advisor read the true intentions of celestial trade with just a glance. They were taking the fruits of other countries' interests and transfusing them to their own space industry. Of course, they alone couldn't digest the fruit, so they also invited other countries to the feast. If this was an era of space competition, developing the aerospace industry was just a means to boost national confidence, so it wouldn't matter. But with the profit prospects of the industry surging at an exponential rate, the capital must respond. Needless to say, the space industry parks in Silicon Valley and Seattle had already exceeded $1 trillion in value. If they were kicked off the space elevator, the loss would be instrumental. The risks of the economic crisis have emerged, and we might not see anything in the short term. But if this defense tax persists for a long time, the gap between us and the space industry will only grow. Before it's too late, we must do something. I propose to impose economic sanctions on XIN on the grounds of suspected trade protectionism. At a regular meeting in Congress, a Congress member stood up and spoke fiercely. Economic sanctions, the term which was drastically different from antitrust investigations. If antitrust investigations were rifles, then economic sanctions were nuclear weapons. Based on the market size of both countries, both would suffer. It was ultimately dependent on who could last longer. In the exploitation of third world countries, economic sanctions often worked wonderfully. Using poverty to force the compromised had been a common trick since the Cold War era. However, in Congress this time, there was surprisingly no reaction and different perspectives emerged. Now our top priority is to negotiate with celestial trade to minimize the impact of the defense tax on our space industry, rather than let the conflict escalate further and spread to other areas. A Republican member stood up and raised objections. Quickly, another Congress member stood up. I concur. If it eventually turns into a trade war, I believe we can win in many fields, but in the tech sector, we will suffer a tremendous loss. Especially in the virtual reality network, no modern country can leave the network, and we can't afford this loss at all. In addition, there's a very crucial point, the Congress member said, who looked around at the other members. He said helplessly, at this time, the sanctions against the Earth Defense Alliance are simply unjustified from the public's perspective. Before the meeting, I paid attention to the official website of the Capitol. The application for the Capitol to join the Earth Defense Alliance has exceeded 20 million signatures. Everyone looked at each other in shock. What they were most worried about had finally happened. Time quickly passed, and a week had passed since the Earth Defense Alliance was established. With the joint efforts of more than 20 countries, the administrative and command system of the Earth Defense Alliance was completed. Celestial City was selected as the final location and the ultimate headquarters of the Earth Defense Alliance. The purpose of the Earth Defense Alliance was to resist the aggression of extraterrestrial civilizations. Therefore, the organization had a separate administrative and command system independent of all countries and did not report to any country. Aside from major decisions that required voting from all member states, all matters were executed by the highest commander. Based on the Coro City Agreement, in addition to the bureaucrats and military officers appointed by each country, the Earth Defense Alliance administrative officials and volunteers would be selected from member state citizens who had voluntarily applied. Once the applicant was selected, the person would automatically be deemed to have given up their original nationality to become a glorious member of the Earth Defense Force. The person would hold a passport issued by the Earth Defense Alliance with free mobility in member states. Food and housing expenses would all be covered by the Earth Defense Alliance, as well as a competitive salary. The trade-off of great benefits was harsh training and strict discipline. The Earth Defense Alliance would strictly implement militarized management, and even non-combatant personnel would need at least 5 months of military training. The training time of the Marine Corps and space soldiers was more than a year and not capped. The ultimate goal of all training was to create an army that would never retreat. Even in the worst situation, they would only move forward. Even if only one person remained. While it sounded simple, it was impossible to truly achieve this goal without a decade or more of training. Fortunately, the space colonization ship was still many years away. Jiang Chen had enough time to resharpen the claws of the civilized people. The Earth Defense Alliance would be a war machine that guarded the future of Earth's civilization. From the giant spaceships to the wrenches of the workers, they all served for the war. It was the only way for Earth to have a fighting chance against the fearless bugs. Jiang Chen understood very well what kind of beast he was creating. But he also knew very clearly that it was an inevitable step that must be taken. Celestial City, Earth Defense Alliance headquarters. Representatives from various countries walked into the external space station. They took the elevator and arrived at the office floor of their own department. They were the elites selected from various governments and military forces with a wealth of experience in leading and planning. They also had a preliminary understanding of space. At the top of the Earth Defense Alliance headquarters, the elevator doors opened and representatives in their nation's military uniforms walked in. A middle-aged man in a Hua military uniform entered and fixed his collar. When he passed by Jiang Chen, there was a smile on his aged face. He then extended his right hand to Jiang Chen. "I saw it, great speech. Thank you." Jiang Chen shook hands with him, smiled, and nodded before he gestured. "Please sit down." The Earth Defense Alliance was established. Before the formation of the army, the parties needed to further discuss the details of the covenant. For example, one of the most critical issues that must be discussed at the forefront was countermeasures against extraterrestrial civilization. An effective strategy was necessary to develop targeted defense countermeasures. A total of 20 members of the Earth Defense Alliance Committee were present, including senior officials from national intelligence departments, experts in the space industry, and scientists and military personnel. For example, the man who shook Jiang Chen's hand was Wu Changfeng. He was the former deputy commander of the General Staff Department, 2nd Division, ranked Major General. The old hairy Russian on his left was a subordinate of Natasha's father, and the former Special Operations Brigade of the 58th Army, also ranked Major General. And the Frankfurt astronomer, Anthony Leibniz, was also a prominent figure in the international astronomy field. He served as the director of the European Space Agency. Of course, not all member states had sent their own representatives. For example, countries like Country F and Moro, without much understanding of the space field, hadn't come. After all the members sat down, Jiang Chen looked at the people present and began. "Before the meeting, I must emphasize one thing. I hope you will keep the contents of today's discussion strictly confidential, even to your home country. If you have any objections, you can apply to leave." Jiang Chen looked around the conference table. When no one stood up, he nodded and turned on the holographic screen. In the center of the holographic screen was a star map between the solar system and Gliese 581. In the star map, several broken white lines were drawn. These white lines marked the trajectory of the vacuum belt left by Harmony's space colonization ship as it traversed in space. If these broken trajectories were put together, a clear path between Gliese 581 and Earth formed. Based on information obtained by celestial trade, the distance between Harmony's space colonization ship and Earth has shortened by at least 50% in the past century. It's currently only 10 to 6.7 light-years away. That's a high margin of error. Wu Changfeng frowned, as he examined the star map in the holographic screen with seriousness. It's because they entered the unobservable zone. Jiang Chen's fingers gently clicked on the control panel and circled a large dark area in the star map. This unobservable area is about 5 light-years wide. Due to the low density of stars, we cannot judge their coordinates due to the lack of reference point. We have to prepare for the worst case. If they're only 6.7 light-years away from us, then we're likely to encounter them within 50 years. In order to avoid them landing on Earth, we better take care of the problem outside of the solar system. Besides building a space fleet, I would like to hear if there are any better opinions. After the two Russians exchanged their opinions quietly, the seemingly reticent Mogilov stood up and made a suggestion. Although I have no experience in Star Wars, in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, we're on the defensive and tactically inferior. In contrast, we have the strategic advantage. I suggest we build fortifications in the Kuiper belt outside the solar system to increase our firepower to the maximum at the expense of mobility. This'll also support the frontline fleet in the battle against Harmony's space colonization ship. Chapter 1105 Project Trench. Moginov's proposal received support from all the members present. Everyone saw the benefits of the plan, and even Jiang Chen complimented the idea because when he talked to Kelvin yesterday, they reached the same conclusion. The Kuiper belt 40 astronomical unit from the Sun extended to hundreds of astronomical units away. The belt was formed by frozen microplanets ranging from a few kilometers to thousands of kilometers in radius and tens of thousands of comets. They were formed when the solar system was created. The construction of fortifications in the Kuiper belt not only provided long-range fire support for the battlefield, but it was also capable of providing supplies and ammunition to the fleet. The fast-moving comets and ice bodies would not only serve as defensive bunkers, but they would also provide abundant water for the garrisons in the fort. It's a good idea to build a fortification, but how can we solve the problem of rotation? If our fortification changes position constantly, how can we ensure that they will be defending the path of the colonization ship? And how can they provide support to our fleet? Wu Changfeng got up and raised his questions. This isn't something to be worried about, Leibniz, who once worked at ESA, said. One rotation of the Kuiper is quite long. If we build the fortress inside the Kuiper belt, we can control the revolution period to 300 years. With consideration to the direction of Harmony's space colonization ship, if they want to be captured by the gravitational forces of the solar system, they must approach the Kuiper belt at a tangential angle and reduce the speed below the third cosmic speed. With the 60-degree wide-angle range, the fortification can effectively provide support. As long as we ensure that the fortification's coordinates are accurate and the engine is fine-tuned with its coordinates, then the plan is entirely feasible. After Wu Changfeng listened to Leibniz's explanation, he nodded and sat back down. His knowledge about space was limited, but from a military point of view, this plan sounded feasible. As long as the space fortress didn't turn in a completely different direction. Therefore, while building the space fleet, the decision for the construction of the space fortress in Kuiper belt was also made. As for the technical feasibility of building space fortress 40 astronomical units from the Sun, it wasn't the consideration of this meeting, that would be the work of the scientists. In the next hour, 20 members made comments and refined details relating to building the space fortress. For example, they discussed how many artilleries would be necessary, the budget, the size of the fortress, and the force stationed. Jiang Chen also put forward additional suggestions on the plan, such as creating a minefield outside the Kuiper belt. The entire plan was named Project Trench. Because they were uncertain if organizations similar to Eurofun that maintained connections with Harmony still existed, Project Trench was classified as Class E confidential. Other than the fortress itself, no other information would be disclosed to the public. At the end of the meeting, the 20 members took an oath and swore to keep the topics discussed in this meeting a secret. Of course, the so-called oath was only ceremonial. For people of their status, the idea of the law was hardly binding to them. Their positions ultimately dictated their decisions. If conditions permitted, they would do their best to protect the interests of their own countries. For example, they might leak the plan to the relevant companies in advance, then prepare a bid in advance. For at least 2 decades, the nationalism inside the Earth Defense Alliance would remain prevalent. However, Jiang Chen wasn't in a hurry. He prepared many ways to assimilate them into becoming his own. After the oath took place, the members packed up and were prepared to exit. However, just as people were about to leave, Jiang Chen clapped his hands and gestured to everyone to look at him. Before we officially conclude today, I want to give you a present on behalf of celestial trade. Then Jiang Chen gently clicked on the control panel. Soon, 4 housekeeping robots walked out from the side door with trays in their hands. The robots then distributed the contents on the table. Everyone was confused. This is a DNA telomere modification agent. When they heard the strange name, the members present frowned and became even more confused. After all, they hadn't studied biology. While they understood DNA, what did telomeres mean? Only the biologist from Malay reacted. DNA telomere? I says this. The biologist was so excited that he could hardly articulate, completely unable to speak properly. He passionately stared at the needle on the table, with eager glowing out from his eyes, his fingers trembled as if he was coveting a heavenly object. Is this, a genetic vaccine from celestial trade? Interesting. Holding the needle in his hand, Wu Changfeng was intrigued. As the former deputy commander of the General Stuff Department, 2nd Division, he certainly heard rumors about the magical genetic vaccines. Hua had always wanted to bring some back for research, but celestial trade never planned to sell them. The genetic vaccine was rumored to greatly strengthen bodily conditions with just 1 injection. Even a weak, untrained individual could possess the explosiveness and endurance of a special forces soldier. The most important thing was that the changes only affected somatic cells and had no effect on the reproductive cells, so changes wouldn't be passed on to offspring. Hearing the term, genetic vaccine, the Russian member also looked at the needle on the table, eyes sparkling with fiery. This isn't a genetic vaccine. Jiang Chen smiled and shook his head as he looked at the people with different expressions. What is it then? Wu Changfeng asked. With a mysterious smile, Jiang Chen made a revelation. Something that will make you live longer. After the meeting, Wu Changfeng took the express to return to the hotel he was staying at in the residential area of Celestial City. At the door, he paused and ordered the guard behind him with seriousness. Without my orders, don't come in and bother me. Yes. The guard saluted and stepped aside. He walked into the room, then closed the door behind him. He hurriedly sat down on the sofa and stared at the needle in his hand as his breathing gradually turned heavier. He was 41 years old. With the rank of Major General at this age and capability of representing his country in such an important position, his resume was peerless among his peers. He has a beautiful wife who was 10 years younger than him. He also had a son who was in junior high school and a daughter who was in elementary school. With success in both career and family, he thought that there was no temptation in the world that could allure him. However, his eyes were firmly glued to the needle in his hand. His identity reminded him that he should bring this thing back, take it to the Academy of Sciences, or gift it to a more powerful individual who needed this more. However, another voice in his mind repeatedly told him to use it for himself. He began to recall what Jiang Chen said in the end. The serum in the test tube is only 20 milliliters, which can effectively resist aging and prolong your life by 10 years. Before absolute resistance, each person can inject up to 10 tubes and each injection must be separated by 10 years, and the efficacy of each injection will be weakened each time. In an ideal situation, as long as you can inject this special serum every 10 years, there's no problem extending your life by 70 to 80 years. Frankly speaking, the production of this serum is quite limited. If not for the fact that I want you all to see our day of victory, I wouldn't have given this to you as a gift. Living longer than others is both your power and your obligation. Of course, you can take it or let it go. The choice is on you. This is both your power and your obligation. Jiang Chen's last sentence touched the most sensitive part in Wu Changfeng's mind. Yes, this is my power. Why should I gift it to you? I'm the one making the sacrifice, I'm the one standing in front of mankind. What do you have to offer to make me give my life to you? No longer hesitant, he pushed out all the thoughts of giving it to the country. He picked up the needle and directed it at his vein. Pushing away all of his distractions, he made up his mind and injected the needle with his eyes closed. As the serum was injected into his body, his heartbeat gradually returned to normal. He quietly waited for the onset of the drug as he leaned back into the sofa. The second hand of the clock ticked, but the expected pain didn't arrive. He frowned and looked at the spot where he injected the serum. Is there no response? Just as he was talking to himself, a sharp pain diffused out from his arm. He sweated profusely. As a soldier, Wu Changfeng's face turned into a pale white. He gritted his teeth, but he somehow endured the pain without saying a word. Boiled blood spread through his veins, surged freely in his blood vessels, the pain also diffused throughout his body. Is this the price of life? That's too easy then. Wu Changfeng gasped for cold air, and he barely squeezed out his words before he slowly laid down on the sofa. The pain began to spread out from his blood vessels, deep into his internal organs, and out to his skin. Suddenly, all the pain disappeared in an instant. This is the end. He quietly murmured, then he closed his eyes and drifted asleep. He made a choice without realizing it. The choice of loyalty. In his sleep, he had a dream. He dreamed that his wife, son, and grandson turned old. He watched them being lowered into their graves, but he remained so young. At the end of the dream, he saw a fire. Flames engulfed Earth, swallowed up all the cities, immersed the battleship of the Earth fleet, and incinerated everything. Wu Changfeng woke up from the nightmare and suddenly popped up from the sofa. After he realized that everything was just a dream, his rapidly pumping heart gradually calmed down. Is it already noon? The guard had obeyed his order from last night and didn't wake him up. As he panted, he looked away from the clock on the wall. He rubbed his forehead, and slowly sat up from the sofa. He now just realized that he was drenched in sweat and he started to feel cold. After he took his clothes off, he went to the bathroom to take a shower. However, when he passed the mirror, he suddenly stopped. Perhaps it was an illusion, but he realized that he seemed to be at least 5 years younger than yesterday. Everyone chose to inject. Excellent, keep an eye on them until they leave the city. Roger. Jiang Chen hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair. He looked at the blue planet outside the floor-to-ceiling window and regained a sense of certainty. Not surprisingly, everyone eventually chose to use the 20 milliliters of serum on themselves instead of bringing it back to their countries. From the beginning, Jiang Chen knew that once this serum appeared on the market, regardless of the impact on celestial trade, its existence would have an unimaginable impact on the existing social order. Although he didn't clearly state it, he would never allow them to bring it to Earth and wouldn't allow them to gift this to a powerful individual for superficial reasons. As a simple example, civilians wouldn't be able to afford this life-extending vaccine. Once it appeared on the market, the lives of the rich and powerful would be much longer than that of ordinary people. Wealth would be more and more concentrated. It wouldn't be long before the world's wealth was concentrated in the hands of the 0.1% or even less. By that time, it would be the end of the civilization. However, everything had two sides. As long as it was done properly, the positive effects of longevity serum could be far greater than its negative effects. For example, it could be used to win over people's allegiance. The 20 members of the Earth Defense Alliance were regarded as the elites of the elites in their respective countries. Jiang Chen didn't naively think that money or power could make them abandon the concept of country and dedicate their lives to the Earth Defense Alliance. However, people always had weaknesses. The more successful people were and the more powerful people were, the more people feared death because once they died, they would lose far more than the average person. Life was a good option to allure them. As early as the sphere of influence of NAC had expanded to Hongcheng, Jiang Chen learned the secret of eternal life from Dr. Sun and received 100 milliliters of serum. From this 100 milliliter serum, Lin extracted the anti-aging fragments from the DNA and the anti-aging substances dissolved in the serum for further research. Although eternal life wouldn't be possible, it was easy to extend a lifespan by tens to hundreds of years without side effects. The serum also wouldn't cover up the original hidden genetic code. Now with more than 2,000 sisters, her research ability had drastically increased. Perhaps in a few more years, she could really invent an eternal potion. But for those committee members, this would be enough. Although extending their lifespans would benefit the Earth Defense Alliance, it would also be troublesome if they lived forever. In the future, the Earth Defense Alliance would become stronger and stronger under the oppression of external factors, even to a point where it would replace all countries and evolve into the Earth Federation. By that time, if a bunch of old hags occupied the committee seats, there would be rigidity in the decision-making abilities of the committee. There must be hope for the young. Immortality was only an option for himself. And also his closest relatives, of course. His finger tapped on the touchpad. He raised his hand, made a few strokes against the holographic screen, and called out the meeting minutes from yesterday. He started to scan the summary sections line by line. Project Trench, Project Starship. Although only 4 words, it's certainly difficult. He shook his head, then leaned back with a headache. Building a planet fortress or a space fleet would require an astronomical amount of steel and production capability. The current Mars colony was essentially a planted seed. It would take a long time for it to grow into a towering tree. It seems we must speed up. With a long sigh, Jiang Chen closed the summary and connected to the database of the Mars Colonization Project Department. Just as he planned to inspect the development of the colony, a report uploaded 10 minutes ago that was unread caught his attention. Taikan Kyohosuji, the principle of big ships and big guns, a naval tactics used by the Japanese in the Second World War where achieving victory would be dependent upon the effective use of a strong battleship force. At the main axis area of the space elevator was the gravity-free section of Celestial City and the port of the city. Since the launch of the asteroid mining program, countless small and medium-sized transport vessels docked against the port, as they waited for the robotic arms to load and unload the ores inside the containers. In addition to the transport vessels that carried ores, a passenger ship shaped like a cuboid occasionally flew out from the transfer station and headed for the moon. Since celestial trade announced regular flights between Earth and the moon, travel between Lunar City and Earth became much more frequent. The size of Lunar City had expanded significantly compared to before. Living units circled the central square, connected by graphene pipes. A total of nearly 10,000 people called this place home, and most of them were part of the young labor force with high education levels. To meet the needs of the citizens, Celestial Trade also built an elementary school, a junior high school, a senior high school, a community college, a hospital, a police station and other municipal facilities around the central square. Celestial Trade also opened bids for the construction of hotels, bars, cafes, and other entertainment facilities. In addition to the resident population, at least 4,000 passengers traveled between Lunar City and Celestial City daily. These people included immigrants to the moon, tourists, or investors looking for opportunities. A series of electrolysis chambers and lunar ice drilling exploratory wells were constructed to produce a steady stream of oxygen and hydrogen for the colony. The rare earth mining stations with robotic arms and a lunar refinery that produced helium-3 supported the economy and industry of Lunar City. 60% of the world's iron and aluminum mines and 80% of rare earth mines were connected by the 36,000-kilometer elevators. It was precisely because of this that there was the 50% defense tax which made the capitalists in the Western Hemisphere ache in pain. The decision was a blow right to their chest, and they were forced to be labeled as scared. In the lift cabin of the space elevator, Wu Changfeng stood quietly at the window and looked out at the dark-colored megaship. SS Seagull, a name not unfamiliar to anyone. The ship equipped with the Red River X-1 engine was personally named by Jiang Chen. It was the first 500,000-ton ship of celestial trade and the first interstellar ship of the Earth civilization. Since then, any 500,000-ton ship produced by celestial trade was named after the Seagull class. The 600-meter-long hull was connected to the main axis of the elevator by a cantilever. It looked massive from the distance and made the spacecraft moving around it look so insignificant. In the eyes of Wu Changfeng, the size of the Seagull-class transport ship was already large enough. It was at least the size of 3 aircraft carriers connected together. However, even a mighty ship this size couldn't serve as the main force in the fight against Harmony. He couldn't help but feel concerned about the future of Earth. What kind of enemy are we facing? What are you looking at? Lu Hao walked beside him and smiled. Lu Hao, the former captain of the Nanning destroyer, ranked admiral. He served as a representative on the Hua side. Wu Changfeng turned his head as his colleague started to chat with him. He was about to say something, but when his eyes stopped on his arm, he swallowed his words. Lu Hao saw the message in Wu Changfeng's eyes. He sighed, helplessly lifted up his sleeve, and showed him the needle hole on his arm. You also injected? Wu Changfeng raised an eyebrow. While his expression didn't change, the caution in his mind gradually disappeared. Do you think that if I didn't inject that, they would let us go so easily? Lu Hao helplessly lowered his sleeve again. Wu Changfeng frowned and quickly understood what he meant. A smile formed on the expressionless face as he whispered. We haven't heard of any DNA telomere-modified serum and haven't injected anything. Of course. You didn't think I would have written that in the report? Lu Hao laughed and shook his head. I'm not that stupid. It would have definitely caused us trouble. Wu Changfeng nodded. Hua had 2 seats in the Earth Defense Alliance Committee. What he worried about most previously was that Lu Hao would hand it over to the country. If that was the case, he would undoubtedly lose the trust of the organization and even cause some important people to be unhappy. With the state's influence on the Earth Defense Alliance, he might be sacked from his position. But based on what happened, he seemed to have worried too much. No one could reject the temptation to live forever, especially for people like them. Do you think we have hopes of winning this war? Luo Hao said as he looked at the Seagull-class transport ship outside the window. Wu Changfeng glanced at his colleague, then quietly said, I have no doubt that we'll win. General Wu is indeed from a political background, your way with words is so beautiful. Lu Hao forced out a laugh awkwardly. Wu Changfeng raised his eyebrows and just wanted to say, worrying about what will happen after defeat isn't what soldiers should do, but this sentence didn't come out in the end. If it was before, he could say this as a soldier without any scruples. Considering the short life of humans, he wouldn't see the day when the first battle with the extraterrestrial civilization. However, his life was extended by more than 80 years now. If technology continued to progress, perhaps his life would continue to be prolonged. On the day of the final battle, there would certainly be a chance to witness that scene with their own eyes. In your opinion, what is our chance of winning? Wu Changfeng asked. Less than 30%. Oh. Wu Changfeng raised an eyebrow and laughed. We still have 30%. Maybe it's an occupational disease. Lu Hao shrugged. Now the Earth Defense Alliance is showing signs of favoring big ships, which makes me very worried. Then in your opinion, what route should we take? Wu Changfeng asked. Lu Hao smiled. Don't forget that I used to be on the destroyer. I naturally prefer the use of carrier battle groups. The high-mobility destroyer can divide the battlefield, then the carrier deploys planes to attack the opponent's weakness. What if the artillery of our destroyer isn't enough to break the defense of the enemy? Wu Changfeng raised a sharp question. Silence ensued for a long time, then there was a response. That's why we're all outsiders. The doctrine of the modern Navy could serve as the theoretical basis for the future Starfleet, but after all, the ocean and the universe were two distinct fields, and everything was still in the exploration stage. I believe in you. Wu Changfeng patted Lu Hao's shoulder and grinned. By the time we select the commander, I'll vote for you. Then I will thank you now. The space elevator gradually approached the gravity-free section, and the SS Seagull from a distant outline was now in front of their eyes. However, Wu Changfeng suddenly noticed on the bridge between the SS Seagull and the space elevator, a team of soldiers in kinetic skeletons were boarding the ship. What are they doing? Wu Changfeng frowned. Lu Hao took a few steps forward. The tip of his nose was almost touching the window, and a frown also emerged on his face. Orbital airborne troops. Is it a military exercise? If my memory is correct, Celestial Trade hasn't been fighting anyone lately. While talking, the transport cabin carrying soldiers was loaded onto the SS Seagull. The robotic arm that clamped the SS Seagull separated from the hull. The engine began to ignite and pushed the giant vessel outwards. Just as the two of them wondered where the SS Seagull would set sail, the lift cabin they were in entered the orbit of the space elevator. They could only watch Celestial City and the SS Seagull accelerate away from them. 5 kilometers underneath the Martian colony, they discovered the suspected remains of the Martian civilization. It was an incredible piece of news. After Jiang Chen read the report from the colonial captain, Hong Zhiwei, he immediately called Kevin and dispatched the second group of colonists in advance. A new Seagull class was responsible for this transport mission. The 500,000-ton ship was commissioned half a month ago. With the improved version of the Red River X1 engine, the ship could complete the acceleration and deceleration phase in a shorter time while achieving higher cruising speed within the solar system. Based on the calculated data from quantum computers, the trip from Celestial City to the orbit of Mars would only take 21 days with the current relative position between Earth and Mars. Because the colonization plan was pushed ahead by 3 months, the 100 colonists who were being trained had to end the training ahead of time. They boarded the ship inside the hibernation chambers with goods to be taken to the Martian colony. In addition to the colonists, there were 10 orbital airborne soldiers equipped with the most advanced Gauss rifles and outer space kinetic skeletons. Although Jiang Chen expressed doubts about the existence of Martians, after all, Mars was only habitable more than 3 billion years ago. Even if they dug their own tombs underground, they probably turned into sand by now, let alone any living creatures. However, in order to reassure the colonists, Jiang Chen finally decided to send a force. He was aware of the extreme behaviors of people in an isolated state. At the same time as the second group of colonists set off, the 20 members of the Earth Defense Alliance also returned to the surface, which ended Ghost Agent surveillance. After Jiang Chen left the office, he went to Future Heavy Industries shipyard. The shipyard was located in the gravity-free section of the main axis of the space elevator, next to the port. When Jiang Chen arrived at the shipyard, the hull of a 600-meter-long Seagull-class transport ship was fixed by more than a dozen mechanical arms and was suspended in space. It occupied almost 90% of the shipyard. Numerous construction robots surrounded the outside of the transport ship and welded finished parts to the transport ship. At the rear of the ship, 4 mechanical cantilevers were connected to a wide variety of tools from screwdrivers to laser welding guns. These mechanical cantilevers were performing complex operations, which was connecting the Red River X1 engine to the slot at the rear of the ship. The wisdom of working people was unlimited. Although the design drawings and key technologies of the Seagull-class transport ship were provided by Jiang Chen, the entire production process was the crystallization of the hard work of 10,000 scientists, technicians, and senior engineers of Future Heavy Industries. This production process wasn't necessarily the most optimal, but it could be renowned as the best in the world. Jiang Chen could proudly announce to the world that Future Heavy Industries was the only company that had mastered the manufacturing process of a 500,000-ton transport ship. Whether it was Russia's Oleg class, Hua's Changchun class, or UAE's Apollo X-1, they were just small fishes in the water in front of his big Seagull. Of course, while he fantasized, he didn't come here to look at the magnificent size of the Seagull-class transport ship. He had more important matters to attend to. Not long afterward, a middle-aged man in a uniform flowed to him while kicking his legs back, then he skillfully grabbed the armrest and stood still by the window. As the shipyard manager of Future Heavy Industries, he was in a meeting with senior engineers at the shipyard. When he heard reports of Jiang Chen's visit, he quickly asked his right-hand man to take over the meeting while he rushed over. Dai Jingming anxiously looked at Jiang Chen while he explained, "Sorry, I was in a meeting with the technicians. I didn't know the boss personally came to the shipyard to perform an inspection. If there are any places where you think can be improved, please let me know." "There's no need to be so polite." Jiang Chen let go of his hand on the railing and waved his hand to signal Dai Jingming to not to take it to heart. He smiled, "I just came for a quick tour, I hope I didn't bother your work." "No, no." Dai Jingming quickly waved his hand and laughed, "If there's anything you don't understand, please be sure to talk to me. I know all the answers." Jiang Chen politely smiled and turned his gaze to the Seagull class outside the glass window. He paused for a moment then said, "In the fleet plan approved by the Earth Defense Alliance, open tender is scheduled for the first million-ton class warship to the enterprises in the member states is scheduled for a week later. Currently, only we have the technical capability of the hull welding, the engine, and the ecological warehouse. You are an expert in this area, so I would like to refer to your opinion. Are you sure that this million-ton warship is safe?" Dai Jingming's face turned a little sour as he listened to Jiang Chen. "Boss, to be honest, you should have seen it. Our shipyard is still too small. The construction space isn't enough. The 500,000-ton class is already at the limit. If it was any bigger, the bow would have to extend to the outside." Jiang Chen nodded. He also noticed the space problem of the shipyard. The Seagull-class transport ship had already occupied the construction space of the entire shipyard. It should be mentioned here that the entire celestial city was divided into a gravity-free section and a gravity section, and a low-gravity section in the middle. Due to the problem of the center of gravity of the entire space elevator, in addition to the light industries as well as farming, heavy industries such as shipbuilding and steelmaking, which had large resource throughputs, were distributed in the gravity-free section, the main axis of the entire space elevator. Shipyards, ports, and heavy industry factories were stacked together similar to Lego blocks. There were many benefits to this, such as maximizing the use of the limited space available and reducing the time spent on logistics and transportation of industrial raw materials. However, the disadvantages were also obvious. One of them was that if there wasn't enough space, expansion was not an option. At present, there was a steel mill below the shipyard, and the port was right above, both of which were troublesome to demolish. Extending outwards was an option, but the lack of vertical distance severely limited the scale of the shipyard. After some considerations, Jiang Chen looked at Dai Jingming and said, "A million-ton class warship cannot be built at the space elevator. If we separated the entire shipyard out of the space elevator and place it on a synchronous orbit, would this solve the problem?" "Separate it?" Dai Jingming acutely sensed the intention behind the boss's words, and his eyes lit up. He then quickly asked, "You mean, we can build a separate space station outside the space elevator as a shipyard?" "Yes." Jiang Chen nodded. "I don't know if there's any difficulty with implementation. If the shipyard was moved out of the space elevator and served as the satellite city of the entire celestial trade, the space at the shipyard would be much bigger. It would also allow for further expansion based on needs. By that time, 1 million ton, or even 10 million ton interstellar ship could be built. As for the current shipyard, it was only enough to build ships lighter than 500,000 tons. Dai Jingming had considered this issue before, but he was only a shipyard manager after all. It wasn't clear how the space elevator worked. Since he was under Future Heavy Industries, and the space elevator was managed by Celestial Trade, even if he voiced his concern, it was difficult to be heard. Now the boss mentioned this, he wholeheartedly favored this proposal. I will get someone to look after this. You should think about how the space station can be planned. At the same time, Jiang Chen muttered in his mind, Celestial Trade and Future Group's businesses are getting bigger and bigger. It seemed that the cooperation between the departments needs to be strengthened. I'll have to discuss with Xia Xiyu to see if there is any good way. With the joyous Dai Jingming and a group of employees bidding farewell, Jiang Chen left the shipyard. He was about to call Xia Xiyu, however, she called first. What's up? Zhang Yaping just called you but he couldn't reach you, then he called the company. The foreign minister of Nippon is in Koro City, and he wants to have a discussion with you. Chapter 1109 Is the tax a bit too high? It was the 10th time he looked in that direction since he came in. After a phone call with Jiang Chen, he immediately cleared his agenda for the afternoon and came over after the meeting with Zhang Yaping. When Kishida arrived, Jiang Chen was in the space elevator with an hour's journey before he would arrive in Koro. Xia Xiyu arranged for them to meet in this conference room. Several other members of the delegation were also in this room along with him, all of which were members he trusted. In order to avoid causing suspicion in the UA, he came under the banner of electricity negotiations. This meant he couldn't stay for too long. As for the purpose of his trip, it was supposedly for the 50% defense tax. No country in the world had a stronger desire for space resources than Nippon. A lack of resources and strong industrial development was a curse cast on Nippon since the previous century. The slightest turmoil in the economy would cause the Nikkei index to fall. As soon as Celestial City announced the acceptance of foreign capital investment, the capitalists and consortia rushed in, particularly in the rare earth mining projects in Lunar City. They feared Celestial Trade wouldn't accept enough of their money. The total investment of Nippon companies in Celestial City ranked third after UA and Hua and was even ahead of Russia. Hence why the 50% defense tax caused so much pain for them. Just when Kishida was starting to speculate the reason for Jiang Chen's late arrival, the door of the conference room was pushed open and Jiang Chen came in. Kishida immediately got up, his face full of smiles, and he extended his right hand. My pleasure, my name is Kishida, Nippon Foreign Minister. Jiang Chen, President of Future Group and Celestial Trade. There's no need for Mr. Kishida's introduction. We met at the Outer Space Security Summit. Jiang Chen spoke with a half-smile while he shook hands. When Kishida heard the term Outer Space Security Summit, an awkward expression appeared on his face before quickly disappearing. However, as a diplomat, his skin was naturally thicker than most people. He pretended to not hear the words and enthusiastically began to chat with Jiang Chen. Since the T-virus crisis in Yoto and the collapse of the previous cabinet, he changed his political stance and leaned to the left. Because of his support for the new Prime Minister's foreign policy, after the establishment of the new cabinet, he was again nominated to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. He was the only cabinet minister not replaced by the new Prime Minister. Of course, it was also because of the turmoil in the nation and the lack of talented individuals available to the new Prime Minister. Aside from those external factors, he could be used as the perfect example as someone who sat on the fence. He clearly stood on the opposing side at the Outer Space Defense Summit, but now with the Earth Defense Alliance started to take shape, he immediately pretended nothing had happened. However, Jiang Chen would never reject a willing cooperative partner. After they shook hands, Jiang Chen invited him to take a seat. Please. After Minister Kishida sat down, the diplomats with him also sat down. Jiang Chen went to the head of the conference table and sat down. He gestured to the assistant behind him, and instructed him to close the door. After he heard the door click, he leaned back in his chair and looked nonchalantly at the Nippon delegation. Mr. Kishida isn't just here to chat with me, right? You know that I'm a businessman. There's no need to use formalities here. If there's anything you need, just say it. Since Mr. Jiang Chen said this, I will be straightforward, Minister Kishida said, who coughed before he began. Is the 50% defense tax a bit too high? When Jiang Chen heard this, a smile that confirmed his original speculation appeared. This is a decision that was made after internal discussions of the Earth Defense Alliance. All member states voted before the resolution passed. If you disagree with this resolution, you can go discuss with Hua and Russia. Kishida forced a laugh. Mr. Jiang is certainly humorous. As far as I know, this 50% defense tax is collected by the operating company of Celestial Trade Space Elevator. It's injected into the Earth Defense Fund as a donation. Does the Earth Defense Alliance have shares in the space elevator? Jiang Chen raised his eyebrows and looked at the old man in his 60s with surprise. He didn't expect that the man who didn't take the Earth Defense Alliance seriously actually went deep into researching its background. Having said that, he still had the advantage. Therefore, Jiang Chen didn't come up with an excuse and instead played the mankind card. Fighting against the aggression of extraterrestrial civilizations is a common interest of the international community. Since that's the case, it wouldn't be appropriate to let some people stand in the front lines while other people enjoy the fruits of other people's labor. Either pay or contribute, that's fair, isn't it? Fair Maya's asterisk. Minister Kishida cursed in his mind. You used our country's money to support your aerospace companies, then you're using your advanced technology to make money off of us. Is there anything fair about this? However, he could only vent his frustration in his mind. He smiled as he continued. You're right, fighting against extraterrestrial civilization is the undeniable duty of all countries. After watching the example you made, we've indeed seriously reflected on our selfishness in this respect. Therefore, we decided to establish a space force in our military to support the war against extraterrestrial civilization. Jiang Chen didn't speak. Instead, he leaned forward and looked dubiously at Minister Kishida. Just as Kishida was about to feel uncomfortable, Jiang Chen spoke up. You're joking with me? Although Kishida knew that what he proposed was rude, he still felt awkward after hearing such a straightforward response from Jiang Chen. But the negotiation must continue. What do you want then? Smiling, Jiang Chen leaned back in his chair again and said with a relaxed tone, it's easy to avoid the defense tax. Join us. When Kishida heard Jiang Chen's words, he jumped up. That's impossible. We're NATO's allies. How could we join a new military alliance treaty? Jiang Chen didn't care about Kishida's aggressive reaction and said, then just pay the tax and support the Earth defense cause. Nippon is discussing the possibility of joining the Earth Defense Alliance. A report was placed on Hill's desk, and Secretary of State Kerry walked to the sofa in the office and sat down. He picked up the cup of coffee and took a sip to soothe his throat. The issue doesn't only involve Nippon being swayed, the same goes for Australia and New Zealand. Ungrateful. The Chief of Staff standing next to Hill cursed under his breath. What about our nuclear power assistance project? Hill opened the document that Kerry tossed on her desk. She glanced at the report with a serious tone. Kerry shook his head and said, it's useless. For now, our nuclear power project isn't attractive to Nippon. 2 months ago, the half-year discussion between Exelon Nuclear Power Company and the Eastern Power Company of Nippon was cancelled, and it's meaningless to talk about nuclear power at this point. You're right. Hill squeezed her sore eyebrows and said, why's Australia trying to get involved? When have they been interested in outer space resources? Australia itself was a big mining country, and its own domestic minerals weren't fully developed. Naturally, it wasn't necessary to mine in outer space. The defense tax of the Earth Defense Alliance had pushed up the average price of the global commodity market to their benefit. They should be the least interested in outer space resources. Instead, they were entertaining the idea of joining the alliance. Because of the global grid plan. The coffee cup was heavily placed on the table. Kerry walked over to Hill's desk and said with a sullen look, half a month ago, the Australian Federal Parliament was discussing expanding power imports. The quota was used to replace all thermal power stations in Victoria and New South Wales to achieve the 2019 carbon reduction plan. We must immediately pressure Nippon and do everything possible to prevent them from joining the Earth Defense Alliance, the Chief of Staff immediately said to Hillary Clinton. I propose to immediately launch the 2019 Asia-Pacific military exercise and send 2 more aircraft carrier groups and 2 Marine Corps divisions to Guam and Okinawa. We must contain the influence of celestial trade in that region. That would provoke Hua, Hill said in a deep tone. The situation is different. XIN, or celestial trade, has replaced Hua and become the primary threat that may shake our global dominance. If we can't stop them from continuing to expand their regional influence, they're likely to subvert all our efforts since the Vietnam War. The Chief of Staff was heated. If this triggers a new Cold War, Hill looked sharply at her Chief of Staff, who will bear this responsibility? The Chief of Staff opened his mouth, but after he saw Hill's eyes, he quickly closed his mouth. Just now, he saw a hint of cautiousness from the president that shouldn't be there. Not cautious about the fate of the country but cautious about her political career. The UA had already stood at an intersection, and external pressure had never been more severe. If she made the wrong choice, she might go down in history as the person who brought down the country. Her eyes were tightly squeezed together. Hill closed her eyes and meditated for a long time before she slowly said, "We must win back dominance from the Earth Defense Alliance and bring the issue of extraterrestrial civilization back under the United Nations. Contact our allies in Asia and inform them that the 2019 Asia-Pacific Joint Military Exercise will be held next month. In addition, dispatch the Ford-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier to Guam under the name of a military exercise." Hill then looked at Kerry. "Also, I must trouble you to go to XIN. We must talk with celestial trade." "It's useless." Kerry shook his head. "It's not the first time I dealt with that man. He isn't the type to compromise. From the first time I saw him, I knew he would become a threat to our nation. We don't know unless we try. Since they're a company, I believe there's nothing that can't be compromised in the name of personal interests," Hillary said emotionlessly. "Of course, there's nothing that addressing their interests can't solve." Kerry was so angry that he actually laughed and exaggeratedly spread his hands. "But they want the crown on our heads and we can't give it to them." After spitting out the last sentence, Kerry quickly left the president's office. He slammed the door shut and walked over to the map. After he went to the office with a gloomy expression, Kerry looked at the red lines scattered across Asia that had begun to extend to South America. The red line was like a spider web, spreading from Coral Island and providing nutrients that created the despicable celestial trade. "That stupid wire," Kerry squeezed the words out between his teeth and muttered to himself in anger. "Their hands are reaching in South America. Reaching in our back garden. And our president. Just then, a crazy thought suddenly formed in his mind. This idea that had appeared before, but since he won the general election in 2004, the idea never formed in his mind again. Once ambition was born, it would grow uncontrollably. No. This isn't personal ambition. This is for the nation. He hesitated, and his eyes stopped at the phone at the corner of the desk. He suddenly remembered a phone number. That phone number belonged to an entrepreneur who once invested in him in 2004. That person had many titles, such as a well-known investor on Wall Street, such as the chairman of the Morgan Foundation. Wall Street should be the most devastated party by the defense tax. With that thought in his mind, he reached out to the phone. In the Coral Island mansion, leaning on a lounge chair on the balcony, Jiang Chen put his mobile phone on the beach table, and a smirk formed on his face. 2019 Asia-Pacific Joint Military Exercise. It seems they're starting to force their allies to make a choice. Just now, he received a message from a ghost agent. The UA issued the 2019 Asia-Pacific Joint Military Exercise document to its allies in Asia, which was scheduled to be held next month. At the same time, the $13 billion new generation nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, Ford, would arrive at the Guam military base this month to participate in the exercise. Guam was located northeast of Exyon. There was a silky swimsuit tied around her chest and waist that showed off her petite beauty. Aisha, who carried a tray with iced orange juice, placed it next to Jiang Chen. She gently swayed her long brown hair gilded under the golden sunshine, and she looked at him with her sapphire eyes. "Do you need me to do something? Can you give me a massage?" Jiang Chen smiled. Aisha put her hands around Jiang Chen's shoulders. Whenever he had this expression, she knew he had the situation well under control.